My parents ignored 12 emergency calls from my intensive care unit because my sister needed help moving into her new luxury apartment. They told the trauma surgeon to stop harassing them over what they assumed was a minor fender bender. So I had my corporate lawyer meet me right there at my hospital bed. When my family finally bothered to show up with their hands out, demanding money to pay the movers, they learned exactly what their neglect had cost them. They thought I was just a boring corporate employee, but they had no idea who I really was. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut ties with toxic family members to protect your own peace and financial security. My name is Bethany. I am 33 years old and the Director of Supply Chain Operations for a major retail distributor in Chicago. Or at least I was before a drunk driver ran a red light and completely demolished my car on my way home from work late one Friday evening. I woke up hours later to the harsh, blinding fluorescent lights of the intensive care unit. The sterile smell of medical-grade antiseptic burned the inside of my nose, making my eyes water. A rhythmic, mechanical hiss filled the small room, pumping measured amounts of air into my lungs. Every single breath I took sent a blinding spike of absolute agony radiating through my chest. I tried to shift my weight to move my right leg, but found it completely immobilized. It was wrapped in thick, heavy casts and rigid metal braces that felt like they weighed 100 pounds. My entire body felt like it had been crushed under a falling concrete block. My vision slowly cleared as a trauma surgeon walked into my direct line of sight. Dr. Evans had deep dark circles under his eyes, looking physically exhausted but deeply sympathetic. He checked the glowing monitors surrounding my bed, adjusting a few settings before speaking in a low, steady voice that attempted to offer some comfort. "You are very lucky to be alive, Bethany. You have 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and a severely shattered right leg that required extensive reconstructive surgery. You were brought in unconscious, and we had to operate immediately to stabilize your condition. I tried to speak to ask what had happened and where I was, but my throat was completely raw from the breathing tube they had just removed minutes before I fully regained consciousness. I swallowed hard, tasting blood and dry cotton, and managed a hoarse, desperate whisper asking for my family." The surgeon paused, holding his clipboard tightly. He exchanged a heavy, loaded look with the attending nurse standing beside him. His expression tightened with a complex mixture of profound pity and professional frustration. He stepped closer to the edge of my bed, resting his hands in his white coat pockets. "We called your emergency contacts 12 times over the last 24 hours, Bethany. We tried your father first, then your mother. Your mother finally picked up our very last call." I felt a sudden wave of relief wash over me. In my medicated haze, I assumed she was rushing through the hospital doors at that very moment, frantic with worry, demanding to see her daughter. But the doctor gently shook his head, his eyes full of quiet regret. "She hung up on me after 10 seconds. She told us to stop calling and leaving messages." The cardiac monitor beside my bed beeped a little faster as my heart rate spiked in pure disbelief. Hung up. My own mother hung up on a trauma surgeon while I was lying broken and bleeding in a hospital bed fighting for my life. The nurse, a kind older woman named Maria, walked over and gently placed my cracked, blood-stained smartphone on my plastic tray table. "It was recovered from the crushed floorboard of your vehicle," Maria explained softly, placing it near my uninjured hand. "We charged the battery for you at the nurse's station in case you needed to reach out to anyone else who might be able to come sit with you." With trembling fingers awkwardly wrapped in white medical gauze, I reached for the device and unlocked the shattered screen. The notification center was a solid wall of ignored alerts. There were 6 missed calls from the hospital admission desk. There were 3 voicemails from the local police department trying to inform my family about the severity of the accident and where my car had been towed. But nestled right at the very top of the screen, standing out among the emergency notifications, was a single unread text message from my mother, Linda. My eyes scanned the bright text, and the intense physical pain in my shattered leg was instantly eclipsed by a suffocating, familiar ache deep in my chest. The message read, "Stop having the hospital reception desk harass us, Bethany. Brittany is moving today. Her movers are charging by the hour, and your father and I need to supervise the unloading. Stop being dramatic, it is just a fender bender. Do not ruin your sister's big day with your constant need for attention. I stared at the glowing screen, reading those cruel, dismissive words over and over again. A fender bender. I had been cut out of a crushed vehicle with the jaws of life while unconscious. I had undergone a grueling 6-hour emergency surgery just to save my right leg from amputation. I was barely breathing with the help of sophisticated hospital machines. Yet my mother could only focus on the hourly rate of my sister's moving company and protecting her precious golden child from any minor inconvenience. I did not cry. Crying was a luxury I simply could not afford with a punctured lung. Every sob would only bring more physical agony, and I refused to let my family cause me any more pain than they already had. Instead, I opened our family group chat to find the context behind her absolute callousness. The chat history from the past 48 hours perfectly encapsulated my entire existence within this toxic family dynamic. 2 days ago, I had sent a long, proud message to the group announcing a massive career milestone. I had worked 80-hour weeks managing complex supply chains, negotiating stressful vendor contracts, and sacrificing my personal life to finally become operations director. My message was enthusiastic, hopeful, and seeking just a tiny fraction of parental pride. I had typed out how excited I was to finally reach the goal I had been working toward for 5 excruciating years. Linda had completely ignored it. There was no congratulations. There was no acknowledgement of my hard work, my dedication, or my late nights at the office. Her immediate reply in the group chat completely bypassed my news to make a grand announcement of her own. Brittany just signed a lease on her dream luxury penthouse, Linda had typed, followed by a dozen celebratory emojis and exclamation points. Brittany is 30 years old. She is chronically unemployed, jumping from one failed venture to another while calling herself an aspiring lifestyle influencer. She relies entirely on our parents for constant financial bailouts, paying for her expensive designer clothes, her exclusive gym memberships, and her endless tropical vacations. Yet my father Thomas had chimed in immediately after my mother praising Brittany for her elevated tastes and her incredibly bright future. The entire group chat devolved into a massive celebration of Brittany moving into a high-end building while my major career milestone was completely buried and forgotten as if I had never spoken at all. I scrolled back further, seeing the exact same pattern repeat itself over and over throughout my life. When I bought my first modest house, my parents complained about the 30-minute drive to visit me. When Brittany bought a designer handbag with their credit card, they praised her exquisite fashion sense. Everything I achieved through blood, sweat, and tears was met with silent indifference, while everything Brittany demanded was treated like a monumental triumph of the human spirit. I scrolled back down to the messages from yesterday, reading how my parents had planned to dedicate their entire weekend to helping Brittany move into her new expensive place. They detailed their schedule coordinating rental trucks and buying expensive champagne for a toast. That was exactly why my 12 emergency hospital calls were viewed as a nuisance. My near-fatal accident was simply an inconvenient distraction interrupting the golden child's big moving day. They truly believed I was exaggerating a minor car crash just to steal attention away from Brittany. I continued scrolling past Linda's complaining texts sent earlier this morning, groaning about the expensive movers and how long it was taking to load Brittany's custom velvet furniture. Right at the bottom of the chat history, Brittany had posted a proud selfie to show off to our parents. She was standing in front of a sleek, modern building wearing oversized designer sunglasses and holding an expensive coffee cup. The caption read, "Officially moving into my luxury era, thanks Mom and Dad." I looked closer at the photo. My breath caught in my throat, causing a sharp stabbing pain in my broken ribs. I ignored the physical agony and used 2 stiff fingers to zoom in on the background of her selfie. Right next to the towering, spotless glass doors, there was a polished brass plaque mounted on the expensive stone wall. The engraved letters became crystal clear on my shattered phone screen. 405 Maple Avenue. I dropped the phone onto my lap, my heart hammering frantically against my bruised chest. That was not just any luxury building in Chicago. It was a property that required strict background checks, flawless credit, and proof of income that Brittany absolutely did not have. And more importantly, it was a building that held a massive secret my family knew absolutely nothing about. 405 Maple Avenue. I stared at the brass plaque in the background of my sister's selfie. The polished metal gleamed perfectly in the afternoon sun, exactly the way I had instructed the property management team to polish it every single Tuesday and Friday. This was not just a random high-end luxury building in the most desirable neighborhood in Chicago. This was my building. It was the crown jewel of Apex Holdings, LLC. I formed Apex Holdings 4 years ago under a labyrinth of legal corporate structures specifically designed to keep my identity completely anonymous. For 4 years, I had poured every ounce of my energy, every bonus, every promotion, and every drop of my savings into building a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio. I had sacrificed holidays, weekends, and sleep to acquire properties, renovate them, and turn them into highly profitable assets. And while I was building an empire from the ground up, my family had relentlessly mocked me. My parents constantly ridiculed my long hours. They called me a boring corporate drone. My mother loved to announce at Thanksgiving dinners that I was throwing my youth away, sitting behind a desk while my sister Brittany was out living her best life and building her brand. Brittany, who had not held a single paying job in 5 years. The sheer impossibility of the situation struck me like a second wave of physical trauma. I knew the exact tenant requirements for the Maple Avenue property because I had written the corporate policy myself. Apex Holdings required a flawless background check. We required a credit score of over 700. We mandated undeniable proof of liquid income equaling at least 40 times the monthly rent. We required extensive references and a massive security deposit to even be considered for a viewing. Brittany possessed absolutely none of those things. My sister's credit score was a complete disaster area. She had a string of maxed-out retail credit cards. She had multiple unpaid parking tickets and a history of abandoning apartments the moment she grew tired of the neighborhood. Her entire lifestyle as an aspiring influencer was funded directly by our parents. They paid her cell phone bills, her car leases, and her expensive gym memberships. There was absolutely no way in this universe or any other that Brittany Vance had passed my management company's strict financial screening process on her own merit. It was mathematically and legally impossible. Someone had to have backed her. Someone had to have guaranteed that lease. The physical agony in my shattered right leg throbbed with a vicious, relentless rhythm. The monitors beside my bed beeped rapidly, responding to my spiking heart rate. A nurse rushed into the room immediately checking my vitals and telling me to lie back down. She reached for the intravenous line, preparing to administer another dose of heavy painkillers to knock me out. I slapped her hand away with my uninjured arm. I told her firmly to stop and demanded a clear head. I refused to let the medication dull my senses when I needed them the most. I pushed myself up against the stiff hospital pillows, ignoring the sharp stabbing pain slicing through my punctured lung and broken ribs. I grabbed my cracked phone and bypassed my ignored family group chat entirely. I dialed the private number for David. David was not just my corporate attorney, he was my property manager, my legal bulldog, and one of the very few people on this earth who knew the true extent of my financial success. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm and professional. I did not waste time with pleasantries or explaining the gruesome details of my near-fatal accident. I simply told him I was in the intensive care unit at Chicago General Hospital and that I needed him to drop whatever he was doing immediately. I ordered him to access the Apex Holdings master tenant files, pull the complete unredacted application and lease agreement for Unit 12B at the Maple Avenue property, and get to my hospital room as fast as legally possible. David did not ask questions. He simply said he was on his way. The wait was excruciating. Every minute stretched into an eternity of physical pain and burning realization. I lay there staring at the ceiling, piecing together the timeline of my family's actions. My parents had brushed off a trauma surgeon while I was bleeding out because they were busy moving my sister into my own building. They had treated my near-death experience as an annoying distraction from Brittany's glorious moving day. They had told the hospital staff to stop harassing them over a fender bender because ensuring Brittany's custom velvet sofa was carefully carried up to the penthouse was simply more important than my life. The absolute coldness of their priorities settled into my bones, chilling me far more than the sterile hospital air conditioning. Exactly 1 hour later, the heavy doors of the intensive care unit swung open. David walked in wearing a sharp gray suit that looked completely out of place among the medical equipment and scrubs. He stopped at the foot of my bed, his professional composure cracking for just a split second when he saw the massive casts, the tubes, and the extensive bruising covering my face and arms. He took a deep breath, quickly composing himself, and pulled a sleek black iPad from his leather briefcase. He walked to the side of my bed, pulling up a chair and unlocking the tablet. "You look terrible, Bethany," he said softly, holding the screen where I could see it. "But I have exactly what you asked for. This is the complete executed lease agreement for Unit 12B at Maple Avenue. The tenant of record is Brittany Vance. She signed the lease digitally 2 days ago." I squinted at the bright screen, fighting through the heavy ache behind my eyes. I swiped down past the standard legal jargon, the building rules, and the pet policies. I bypassed Brittany's signature, which was scrawled at the bottom of the first page. I knew she could not have secured this unit alone. I told David to scroll directly to the financial addendums. I needed to see the guarantor agreement. David tapped the screen, bringing up a heavily documented secondary contract. He enlarged the image. This lease was guaranteed by a third party. He explained, his voice tight with professional tension. The guarantor provided comprehensive financial portfolios, tax returns, and banking statements that easily cleared our strict 40 times rent requirement. The guarantor essentially assumed total legal and financial liability for the entire duration of the lease. I stared at the name printed clearly at the top of the guarantor document. It was not my father's name. It was not my mother's name. The name printed on the legal contract guaranteeing my sister's massive luxury penthouse lease was Bethany Vance. My blood ran completely cold. The steady, rhythmic beeping of my heart monitor seemed to echo loudly against the walls of the small room. I looked at the attached financial documents. They were my personal corporate W-2 tax forms. They were my private banking statements. They were the highly confidential financial records I had left locked inside a fireproof safe in my parents' basement 5 years ago before I moved into my own house. They had taken my most sensitive personal information without my knowledge. I swiped the screen again, pulling up the final signature page of the guarantor agreement. There at the very bottom of the digital document was my name signed in a cursive scrawl that looked incredibly similar to my own handwriting. It was a practiced, deliberate forgery. It was a signature designed to pass a standard visual check by a property management clerk. I closed my eyes, taking a shallow, careful breath to avoid aggravating my broken ribs. The reality of the situation hit me with absolute crushing clarity. My father had not just made a simple mistake or a slight misjudgment. To get his golden child daughter into the luxury apartment she demanded but could never afford, he had actively committed identity theft. He had stolen my social security number. He had falsified my corporate financial records. He had legally bound me to a massive financial liability without my consent. He had forged my signature on a binding legal contract. He had committed a federal felony. David watched my face carefully, his eyes tracking the realization settling over me. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a serious low register. "Bethany, this is a forged document. If you did not sign this, and someone else used your identity to secure this property, we are looking at felony wire fraud and identity theft. We are required by corporate policy to immediately invalidate the lease and report this to the authorities. But given the names involved, I needed to bring this to you directly. What do you want me to do?" I opened my eyes and looked at the broken, crushed state of my own body. I thought about the 12 ignored phone calls. I thought about the text message telling the hospital to stop harassing them. I thought about my father standing in the lobby of my building right at this very second barking orders at expensive movers, while proudly using my stolen identity to fund his favorite child's delusions of grandeur. I looked back at the forged signature on the screen. The trap was perfectly laid, and they had walked right into it with their heads held high in absolute arrogance. I turned to my lawyer, my voice steady cold and completely devoid of any familial hesitation. David, I want you to prepare an immediate notice to vacate. I want you to draft a formal police report for identity theft and felony fraud against my father. I want them removed from my property. Get everything ready right now. David lowered his sleek iPad slowly, taking a deliberate step back from the edge of my hospital bed. He looked at me with a complex mixture of profound shock and deep professional concern. David was a seasoned corporate attorney who spent his days navigating hostile corporate takeovers and aggressive real estate acquisitions. He was entirely accustomed to dealing with ruthless competitors and cutthroat business tactics. But seeing a father commit blatant, calculated identity theft against his own daughter, while she lay broken in an intensive care unit, was an entirely new level of depravity, even for him. Bethany. Wait, he cautioned, his voice dropping to a harsh, urgent whisper. Look closely at the supporting documents attached to this digital file. This goes way beyond a simple forged signature on a standard lease agreement. He handed the tablet back to me. I ignored the sudden sharp shooting pain in my collarbone and scrolled past the electronic signature page. My eyes scanned the uploaded PDF attachments that served as the entire financial backbone for Unit 12B at the Maple Avenue property. There was a complete comprehensive credit report pulled just 3 days ago using my exact Social Security number. Below that were 3 years of heavily falsified W-2 tax forms bearing the stolen logo of my corporate employer. Thomas had not just hastily signed my name to get his favorite daughter an apartment. He had meticulously manufactured a completely fraudulent financial profile to satisfy the management company. I stared at the black and white numbers on the glowing screen. The luxury penthouse Brittany had selected rented for a staggering $6,000 a month. Apex Holdings required any guarantor to prove a verifiable annual income of at least 40 times the monthly rent to secure a lease of that magnitude. Thomas had fabricated federal tax documents claiming I made nearly $300,000 a year at my supply chain director job. He had legally bound me as the absolute financial guarantor for my sister's wildly extravagant lifestyle. If Brittany missed a single monthly payment or caused thousands of dollars in property damage, the management company would have the immediate legal right to garnish my wages, seize my bank accounts, and completely destroy my flawless credit score. He thought he was being incredibly clever. Thomas always viewed my corporate career with total absolute disdain. He genuinely believed I was just a boring mid-level desk drone who clocked in and out every day without any real ambition. He assumed I was entirely disconnected from the exclusive world of high-end real estate. He calculated that my mundane life would never cross paths with a premier luxury management firm like Apex Holdings. He thought he could quietly siphon my excellent credit score to fund Brittany's dream apartment without ever triggering an audit or raising a single red flag. The absolute supreme irony of his crime washed over me, bringing a bitter taste to the back of my throat. He had stolen his oldest daughter's identity to defraud a faceless corporate landlord. He had absolutely no idea that the faceless landlord he was currently defrauding was the very same daughter he had just abandoned in a hospital bed. He had successfully scammed his way into a building I owned free and clear. David paced the short length of my sterile hospital room, running a hand over his jaw in visible agitation. Bethany, we are talking about serious federal crimes here, he said carefully, weighing his next words. We are looking at wire fraud. We are looking at massive identity theft. We are looking at falsifying financial documents across state lines. Before I hit send on a formal police report and initiate a massive legal firestorm, should we call him, I glared at David, my heart monitor instantly picking up speed and beeping a rapid, erratic rhythm. I know what he did is horrible. David continued playing the necessary devil's advocate, because it was his job to protect me from any potential fallout. But maybe he intends to pay the exorbitant rent himself. Maybe his own credit was tied up in bad investments, and he just needed to use yours to get her through the door. Should we give him a chance to clear up this misunderstanding before we send armed authorities to Maple Avenue? I clenched my uninjured left hand into a tight fist, the white knuckles standing out starkly against the thin hospital blanket. He did not make a mistake, David. I said, my voice dropping to a glacial absolute zero that echoed off the tiled walls. He made a calculation. My mind instantly flashed back 15 years. I was 18 years old, standing in the kitchen of my childhood home, gripping a paper bank statement that showed a balance of $0.00. I had spent 4 years working brutal weekend shifts at a local diner, saving every single tip and minimum wage paycheck to fund my college tuition. I had carefully amassed nearly $20,000 to secure my future, and overnight, it was completely gone. I vividly remembered confronting Thomas in his home office, demanding to know where my hard-earned money went. He had not even bothered to look guilty. He simply closed his laptop and told me that Brittany needed the money more than I did. She was launching a fashion startup in Paris and required immediate seed capital for her creative vision. When I screamed that he had stolen my future and destroyed my plans, he just sighed heavily, acting like I was being completely unreasonable and hysterical. "You are smart enough to get academic scholarships, Bethany," he had told me with a cold, dismissive shrug. "Your sister needs financial backing to realize her true potential. Family shares resources. Stop being so selfish." Brittany's fashion startup folded exactly 3 months later. She spent the rest of my tuition money partying in Europe and buying designer clothes while I took out massive student loans and worked 3 terrible jobs just to survive my freshman year of college. Thomas never apologized. He never paid me back a single dime. My mother had stood right beside him, nodding in agreement that Brittany's fragile artistic spirit needed more nurturing than my practical education. They simply expected me to absorb the massive financial hit for the sake of their golden child. I looked back at the digital documents displaying on the iPad in my lap. History was repeating itself, but this time the stakes were astronomically higher. Thomas was once again sacrificing my financial security to fund Brittany's extravagant delusions. He was entirely willing to risk my credit, my career, and my livelihood just so his favorite daughter could film social media videos in a marble kitchen she did not earn and could never afford. I handed the tablet back to David, pushing through the lingering pain in my chest. "There is no misunderstanding here," I told my lawyer, keeping my gaze locked firmly on his to convey my absolute seriousness. "My father stole my social security number. He fabricated federal tax documents. He committed felony fraud. If I was just a regular corporate employee and Brittany defaulted on this luxury lease, my life would be completely ruined. I would be buried in hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt and facing severe legal consequences for a contract I never saw." He did not care about that. He only cared about giving Brittany what she demanded. David stood at the foot of my bed, his professional demeanor returning in full force. He understood the assignment clearly, but he needed to issue one final legal warning to ensure I understood the gravity of my next command. "Bethany, if I execute this emergency notice to vacate and file this formal police report, there is absolutely no going back." He leaned forward, resting his hands on the plastic tray table spanning my bed, his eyes searching mine. "The management company is legally obligated to report identity theft to the authorities. The moment I hand this file over to the Chicago Police Department, Thomas is facing a minimum of 5 to 10 years in federal prison. He will automatically lose his professional financial licenses. He will lose his career, his reputation, and his freedom. You are initiating the complete and total destruction of your own father. Are you absolutely, completely sure you want to cross that line?" The sterile hospital room went completely silent. The only sound was the rhythmic mechanical pumping of my oxygen and the steady beep of the cardiac monitor tracking my vital signs. I looked down at my shattered right leg encased in heavy plaster and rigid metal braces. I felt the sharp, agonizing sting of 3 broken ribs pressing against my punctured lung with every shallow breath I took. I looked at the thick plastic IV lines taped securely to my bruised arm, pumping a continuous stream of heavy narcotics into my bloodstream just to keep me from passing out from the sheer physical trauma. Then I looked at my cracked cell phone resting on the edge of the tray table. The screen was dark and lifeless. There were no new messages from my mother asking if I had survived the emergency surgery. There were no missed calls from my father checking to see if I was paralyzed or bleeding internally. There was only the lingering memory of their cruel command to stop harassing them while they moved Brittany into her beautiful new home. They had abandoned me to die alone in a cold trauma ward because paying the movers an hourly rate was their top priority. They had cast me aside without a second thought, leaving me to navigate the most terrifying moment of my life, completely isolated. I looked David dead in the eye, feeling a massive surge of pure, unfiltered adrenaline wash over the physical pain, masking the agony with a burning desire for absolute justice. He left me to bleed out so he could move her into my building using my stolen identity. I said, my voice ringing with absolute finality and cold precision. Cross the line. David did not flinch at my command. He simply nodded, his expression hardening into the fierce corporate litigator I paid him handsomely to be. The sympathetic friend was gone, replaced entirely by the legal shark who had helped me build Apex Holdings into a ruthless real estate empire. He pulled his chair closer to my hospital bed, resting his iPad on his knee, and opened a blank legal drafting application. I ignored the rhythmic mechanical pumping of my oxygen monitor and the sharp, agonizing sting of my broken ribs. I mentally locked away the image of my crushed leg. I was no longer a battered woman lying in a trauma ward. I was the director of supply chain operations and the undisputed owner of a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio. I was in charge. I need 3 specific documents drafted immediately. I said, my voice raspy but echoing with absolute icy authority across the sterile room. Number 1 is an emergency notice to vacate for Unit 12B at Maple Avenue. I do not want a standard civil eviction notice, David. I want a complete termination of access. David typed rapidly, his fingers flying across the digital keyboard. Done, he confirmed without looking up. What is document number 2? Document number 2 is a formal police report to be filed directly with the Chicago Police Department Financial Crimes Division, Y instructed, taking a shallow, careful breath. I want Thomas Vance formally charged with federal wire fraud, felony identity theft, and the falsification of corporate tax documents. He used my social security number and my company logos to defraud a private landlord. I want the full weight of the law brought down on him. I want him in handcuffs. David looked up from his screen, his eyes meeting mine with absolute serious intent. You understand that filing this report strips away any chance of a quiet family resolution, Bethany. This goes straight to the district attorney. He will face severe prison time. I stared back at him without a single ounce of hesitation. A quiet family resolution is what allowed him to steal my college tuition 15 years ago. I replied, my tone completely devoid of any familial warmth. This is not a family dispute over a borrowed sweater. This is a calculated felony committed while I was bleeding out in a crushed car. File the report. David nodded once, recognizing the absolute finality in my voice. He saved the draft and looked back up. And the 3rd document. I need you to access my personal banking portal, I said, shifting my uninjured left arm toward the tray table. 5 years ago, I gave my parents an emergency backup credit card linked directly to my primary checking account. Thomas sat in my living room clutching his chest, telling me a heartbreaking story about failing health insurance and expensive heart medication copays he could not afford. I gave him a card with a $20,000 limit with the strict explicit agreement that it was solely for life or death medical emergencies. I need an immediate total freeze placed on that account. David's eyes narrowed in disgust as the pieces fell into place. He pulled up the banking portal app on his tablet and handed it to me. I typed in my secure password using my stiff, bruised fingers. The account dashboard loaded instantly on the bright screen. I navigated to the transaction history for the emergency medical card, There were no charges for pharmacies. There were no co-pays for cardiology appointments. The pending transactions from the last 48 hours told a completely different story. There was a charge for $800 at a luxury home goods store. There was a charge for $1,200 at a high-end electronics retailer. And sitting right at the very top of the list was a massive pending authorization for over $4,000 at a boutique imported furniture warehouse. My father was actively using my medical emergency fund to furnish Brittany's fraudulent penthouse. "Freeze it," I ordered, handing the tablet back to David. "Lock the entire account down right now." David tapped the screen, executing the digital freeze. The account status immediately shifted from active to suspended in bold red letters. He set the tablet down and pulled out his cell phone, preparing to execute the logistics of my commands. Usually, an eviction in this city is a long, drawn-out civil process. David explained, his tone shifting into rapid-fire legal strategy. Tenants have rights. They get 30 days' notice. They get court hearings. But Bethany, your father made a massive critical error when he chose to commit identity theft to secure this lease. Because the foundational contract was executed via a federal crime, the lease itself is void ab initio. I nodded, understanding the legal terminology perfectly. Void from the beginning. Exactly. David continued, a sharp, satisfied smile touching the corners of his mouth. Brittany Vance is not a legal tenant of Apex Holdings. She is an armed trespasser illegally occupying a luxury penthouse under fraudulent pretenses. We do not need to wait 30 days for a civil court judge to grant an eviction order. We can initiate an immediate police-assisted removal. "Execute it," I commanded, leaning back against the stiff hospital pillows. David dialed his phone, putting it on speaker so I could hear the entire exchange over the quiet hiss of my oxygen machine. He called Marcus, the head of on-site security at the Maple Avenue high-rise. Marcus answered immediately, recognizing David's private number. "Marcus, this is David. I need you to initiate a total lockdown on Unit 12B. David ordered, his voice cracking like a whip. "We have a confirmed case of felony identity theft and lease fraud. The current occupants are illegal trespassers. I want you to immediately deactivate all digital key fobs associated with that unit. Lock down the freight elevators. Do not let another piece of furniture cross that threshold." "Understood," David Marcus replied, his voice tight with professional military precision. "I will secure the lobby and shut down elevator access to the 12th floor right now. Do you want me to confront the trespassers?" "No," David instructed firmly. "Maintain a perimeter and observe only. I am contacting the Chicago Police Department right now. I will be on site with armed deputies in exactly 20 minutes to handle the physical removal. Secure the building." David ended the call with Marcus and immediately dialed his direct contact at the local police precinct. He quickly and efficiently detailed the situation, outlining the stolen identity, the forged documents, and the ongoing active trespass at a high-value property. He requested an immediate police escort to clear the premises and secure the evidence of the fraudulent lease. The commanding officer agreed without hesitation, dispatching 2 deputies to meet David at the front doors of my building. The sheer logistics of the revenge were falling into place with terrifying, beautiful precision. The trap I had laid from my intensive care unit bed was snapping shut around my family with absolute unforgiving force. They thought they had successfully bypassed the system. They thought they were untouchable. They had no idea that a massive legal and law enforcement strike team was currently converging on their location. David packed his iPad back into his leather briefcase, his movements sharp and purposeful. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket, and looked down at me with deep, profound respect. The battered, bruised woman lying in the hospital bed had completely vanished in his eyes. I was the CEO again, directing a corporate war from the front lines. "I am heading to Maple Avenue right now," David said, his voice vibrating with barely contained energy. "I will personally serve the trespass notice to your sister and hand the fraud report directly to the police. I will call you the absolute second the penthouse is cleared and the locks are changed. Do not show them an ounce of mercy, David," I replied, my voice perfectly steady, despite the agonizing pain radiating through my crushed leg. They showed me none. David nodded once, an unspoken promise passing between us. He turned on his heel and strode purposefully out of the room, the heavy intensive care unit doors swinging shut behind him. The sudden silence in the room was profound, broken only by the steady rhythmic beeping of the machines keeping me alive. I lay back against the pillows, staring at the white ceiling tiles. The physical pain was still there, sharp and relentless, but it was heavily muted by the massive surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. For 33 years, I had played the role of the quiet, accommodating daughter. I had swallowed the insults, the dismissals, and the blatant financial abuse. I had allowed them to treat my accomplishments like dirt, while they elevated my sister to a pedestal she never earned. That version of Bethany died the moment my mother hung up on the trauma surgeon. I slowly turned my head to look at my cracked cell phone, resting quietly on the plastic tray table. I reached out with my uninjured hand and picked it up, staring at the dark screen. I knew my family. I knew their absolute lack of shame. I knew that the moment their fraudulent lifestyle faced a single minor inconvenience, they would immediately demand that I fix it. I did not have to wait long. Exactly 2 minutes after David hit send on the digital freeze for my medical emergency credit card, the shattered screen of my phone lit up with blinding, sudden intensity. The device vibrated violently in my hand, buzzing with an incoming text message. I swiped the screen open, ignoring the cracks cutting across the glass. The message was from my father, Thomas. I stared at the harsh, demanding words glowing brightly against the dark background. The sheer, unmitigated audacity of his message was almost breathtaking. There was absolutely no mention of my horrific accident. There was no apology for stealing my identity. There was only a frantic, furious demand for more money. "Your mother's emergency card just declined at the furniture store," the text message read. "Call the bank now. Bethany, we have a massive invoice to settle, and the delivery driver is threatening to leave Brittany's custom velvet sofa on the sidewalk. Fix this card immediately. Stop making everything about you and answer your phone." I watched the bright screen of my shattered phone light up again. It vibrated violently against the plastic surface of the hospital tray table. The caller ID flashed my father's name in bold black letters. The harsh buzzing sound filled the small intensive care room, cutting right through the steady rhythmic beeping of my heart monitor. I did not reach for it. I did not move my uninjured arm. I simply lay back against the stiff hospital pillows and watched the phone vibrate itself toward the edge of the table. It rang for a full 30 seconds before dropping to voicemail. A heavy, silent tension settled over the room, but it was not a fearful silence. It was the quiet, undeniable calm of a trap snapping shut. Exactly 10 seconds later, the phone lit up again. Thomas was calling back. He was relentless. He was furious. I let it ring a second time, watching the screen glow until it went dark. Then came the third call immediately on the heels of the second. The absolute sheer audacity of his persistence sent a fresh wave of cold clarity right through my veins. Whenever I had faced a genuine crisis in my life, my calls to my parents had always gone straight to voicemail. I clearly remembered being 20 years old and doubling over in agony in my tiny college dorm room with a ruptured appendix. I had called my father crying and terrified, begging for a ride to the emergency room. He had answered on the fourth try, annoyed and distracted, telling me to just take an aspirin and go to sleep because he and my mother were at an exclusive wine tasting event and could not be bothered to drive back to the city. I had taken an ambulance alone. Yet now a declined credit card at a luxury furniture store was an absolute 5-alarm fire. The threat of public embarrassment in front of expensive movers and boutique retail clerks was the only thing capable of generating this level of frantic, immediate response from my father. I let the third call go to voicemail, and finally the phone sat still. David finished packing the last of his legal documents into his leather briefcase. He snapped the brass lock shut and looked down at my silent phone, then back up to my face. The seasoned corporate attorney recognized exactly what was happening. He saw the cold, calculated shift in my eyes. I was no longer the battered, bleeding victim of a horrific traffic accident. I was the chief executive officer of Apex Holdings, and I was actively neutralizing a hostile threat. "I will handle the authorities at Maple Avenue, Bethany." David said, his voice low and completely professional. "I will personally ensure the trespassers are removed from your property and the felony fraud charges are filed directly with the lead detective. Take a breath. Hold your ground. I will call you the absolute second the penthouse is secured." I gave him a single firm nod. David turned and walked out of the intensive care unit, his hard leather shoes clicking sharply against the linoleum floor. The heavy double doors swung shut behind him, sealing me inside the quiet, sterile room. I was completely alone. The quiet hiss of the ventilator and the steady, reliable beep of the medical monitors were the only sounds left in the space. I closed my eyes and took a shallow, careful breath, testing the limits of my punctured lung and the 3 broken ribs wrapped tightly in medical bandages. The physical agony was still there, sharp and relentless, radiating up from my crushed right leg, encased in thick plaster and heavy metal braces. But the pain felt entirely different now. It was no longer the terrifying, disorienting pain of a victim. It was an anchor keeping me entirely focused and grounded in reality. I opened my eyes and looked at the control panel clipped to the side rail of my hospital bed. I reached over with my uninjured left hand and pressed the firm plastic button to raise the mattress. The mechanical motor whined as the top half of the bed slowly elevated, lifting my torso. A blinding spike of white-hot pain shot directly through my chest as my broken ribs shifted against the movement. I clamped my jaw shut, refusing to make a sound, refusing to press the call button for the nurse's station. I forced myself into a seated position. I smoothed down the wrinkled front of my faded hospital gown, making sure the intravenous lines taped to the back of my hand were secure and out of the way. I took another slow, shallow breath, rolling my shoulders back as much as the thick bandages would allow. I absolutely refused to be lying flat on my back when the inevitable happened. I knew my parents' psychology better than I knew my own supply chain spreadsheets. A near-fatal car crash and 12 frantic phone calls from a trauma surgeon could not pull them away from Brittany's glorious moving day. They did not care if I was bleeding internally or facing amputation. But severe financial inconvenience was a completely different story. The emergency backup credit card I had given them was now completely frozen. Thomas was currently standing in a high-end retail store or the lobby of my own building, staring down a massive delivery invoice with zero access to my stolen funds. Public humiliation and a lack of access to my bank accounts were the only 2 forces on earth powerful enough to drag my parents away from their golden child. I knew with absolute flawless certainty that they were already in a car speeding toward Chicago General Hospital. They were not coming to check on my vital signs. They were coming to demand that I authorize a bank transfer. I sat perfectly still, listening to the hum of the hospital ward outside my room. I mentally locked away the 33 years of emotional neglect, the constant belittling, the blatant favoritism, and the endless demands for my compliance. I gathered all of that history and compressed it into a tight, hard sphere of pure, unyielding resolve. I had spent my entire life starving for their affection, desperate to earn just a fraction of the pride they showered on my unemployed sister. I was finally full. I did not want their love anymore. I wanted my property back. The minutes ticked by slowly. The heavy pain medication flowing through my IV drip tried to pull me down into a soft, foggy sleep, but I fought it off with pure adrenaline. I stared straight ahead at the closed doors of my room, perfectly still, perfectly prepared. Suddenly, the heavy wooden doors of the critical care recovery unit did not just slide open. They were pushed open with violent, aggressive force, crashing loudly against the rubber wall stops. It was not Dr. Evans returning to check my lung function. It was not Nurse Maria coming to adjust my pain medication. Thomas, Linda, and Brittany marched right into the center of the intensive care unit. They moved with a stomping, entitled fury that completely ignored the delicate life and death environment of the trauma ward. They brushed past a cart of sterile medical supplies and marched directly to the foot of my hospital bed. The visual contrast between my horrific reality and their absolute shallow narcissism was staggering. Brittany was dressed in a pristine, matching designer athletic set, her hair pulled up into a flawless, messy bun, her makeup perfectly applied for moving day selfies. Linda carried a massive luxury handbag, clutching the leather straps with white-knuckled tension. Thomas was red in the face, breathing heavily, his jaw set in a hard, furious line. They brought absolutely nothing with them. There were no bright helium balloons to cheer up a recovering patient. There were no cheap plastic cups of hospital cafeteria coffee. There were no flowers. There were no tears of relief upon seeing that their oldest daughter was actually conscious and breathing. They did not even look at the terrifying metal braces holding my shattered leg together. They did not glance at the complex monitors tracking my irregular heartbeat or the thick bandages wrapped securely around my torso. Their eyes bypassed every single visual indicator of my massive physical trauma. Instead, Thomas marched right up to the edge of my plastic tray table. In his right hand, he was tightly gripping a crumpled piece of paper. He slammed it down right next to my cracked cell phone. It was a moving company delivery invoice. Printed clearly in bold black ink at the bottom of the page was a total balance due for exactly $4,500. Linda marched straight to the foot of my bed. She did not look at the heavy plaster cast elevating my crushed right leg. She did not look at the thick gauze bandages wrapped tightly around my broken ribs. She did not even glance at the cardiac monitor that was currently beeping a rapid, frantic rhythm in response to my spiking blood pressure. Her eyes were fixed entirely on the cracked screen of my phone. "We told you to fix the card issue 30 minutes ago," Linda snapped, her voice echoing harshly against the sterile tile walls. "The delivery men are standing in the luxury lobby of Maple Avenue right this second. They are threatening to leave Brittany's custom velvet sofa right on the Chicago sidewalk if we do not hand them $4,500. It is completely unacceptable, Bethany. Call the bank and authorize the charge immediately." Thomas leaned over the bed, tapping his heavy gold watch with an impatient, thick finger. "Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to have a card declined in front of the building manager?" He demanded, his face flushed with angry red blotches. "You need to call your bank right now and authorize the charge. We have an invoice to settle, and we do not have time to deal with your banking errors today." I slowly turned my head, avoiding the sharp stabbing pain in my neck, to look at my younger sister. Brittany had not even approached the bed. She was standing near the door, completely ignoring the sterile medical equipment and the sharp smell of antiseptic. She had her phone raised high in the air, tilting her head to capture the perfect lighting for a front-facing camera selfie. She puffed out her lips, checking her reflection with absolute total absorption. She was standing in an intensive care unit where people were actively fighting for their lives, and her only concern was whether the fluorescent lighting washed out her expensive cheek contouring. I stared at the three of them. The absolute, sheer, impossibly cold reality of my family dynamic settled heavily over my chest, weighing far more than my broken bones. I was suddenly vividly transported back to my high school graduation day. I had earned the title of valedictorian through 4 years of brutal, relentless studying. I had secured a full academic scholarship. I was standing in my cap and gown waiting to deliver my speech, when my parents simply stood up and walked out of the auditorium. They left because Brittany had just texted them that she was having a minor panic attack over a bad haircut and needed immediate emotional support. I delivered my speech to a row of empty folding chairs. They had always treated my achievements and my existence as an annoying distraction from Brittany's continuous drama. But this was not a missed graduation. This was my life. I had been pulled from the crushed, mangled wreckage of my car by emergency responders using the jaws of life. I had undergone emergency trauma surgery just hours ago, and my father was standing over my hospital bed, aggressively waving a moving company invoice that he expected me to pay using the very same credit line he had sworn was only for life-or-death medical emergencies. I looked from Thomas's demanding red face down to the crumpled invoice resting on my plastic tray table. I slowly lifted my uninjured left hand. My fingers were bruised and stiff, but my movements were completely deliberate. I placed my fingertips against the edge of the paper and calmly pushed the invoice off the tray table. It fluttered quietly through the sterile air, landing face down on the cold linoleum floor. I am not authorizing anything I said, my voice dropping to a low, terrifyingly calm register. The card is frozen. Thomas stared at the paper on the floor as if I had just committed an act of high treason. He blinked his mind, struggling to comprehend the concept of his oldest daughter telling him no. What do you mean the card is frozen? Thomas growled, his voice dropping into the threatening low register he usually reserved for intimidating subordinate employees. You gave me that card for emergencies, Bethany. This is a financial emergency. The movers are charging us $100 for every 10 minutes they have to wait. Unfreeze the account right now, or I swear to God I will call your bank manager myself. I did not flinch. You cannot call my bank manager, Thomas, I replied, maintaining direct eye contact, because you are not an authorized user on that account. I gave you that card 5 years ago when you sat in my living room and cried about your failing health insurance. You swore on your life that the $20,000 limit was strictly for medical emergencies. You promised me you would only use it if someone was in an ambulance or a hospital bed. Linda stepped forward, her face twisting in ugly indignation. Brittany's mental health is a medical emergency, Bethany, she argued fiercely, completely detached from reality. Do you know how stressful moving is? She found the perfect luxury penthouse. She was finally getting her life together. Having her custom furniture abandoned on the street would completely traumatize her. You are being completely unreasonable over a few $1,000s. You have always been jealous of your sister Bethany. Just because you have no life outside of your spreadsheets does not mean you get to sabotage hers. Brittany finally lowered her phone, sighing heavily and rolling her eyes. Seriously, Bethany, you are being so incredibly dramatic right now, she whined, her voice dripping with entitled irritation. You have that boring corporate job. You make plenty of money sitting at a desk all day. I need that sofa. It completely ties together the aesthetic for my new living room content. You are literally ruining my moving day vibe by being so stingy. I looked at the three of them, marveling at the absolute flawless perfection of their arrogance. They had just committed federal identity theft. They had forged my signature on a highly secure corporate lease document. They had fraudulently bound me to a massive financial liability. And now they were standing in my hospital room furious that I would not also pay their moving expenses. They had walked right into the trap I set from my hospital bed, and they were still proudly demanding that I hand them the cheese. I shifted my weight against the stiff mattress, ignoring the sharp protest of my broken ribs. Tell me something, Thomas, I said, keeping my tone conversational and mild. How exactly did Brittany manage to secure a lease at a premier building like the Maple Avenue property? I am quite familiar with the luxury real estate market in that specific neighborhood. Management companies with properties of that caliber typically require extensive financial screening. They demand flawless credit scores. They mandate undeniable proof of liquid income equaling at least 40 times the monthly rent. Brittany has not held a paying job in 5 years, and her credit score is practically non-existent. How did she pass the background check? Thomas's eyes darted away for a fraction of a second, a tiny micro-expression of guilt that vanished as quickly as it appeared. He squared his shoulders, puffing out his chest to project false authority. That is absolutely none of your business, Bethany, he barked loudly, attempting to shut down the line of questioning. We handled the paperwork. Brittany is an aspiring influencer with massive earning potential. The leasing agent recognized her future value and made an exception. I know how to negotiate. I know how to deal with high-end corporate landlords. They saw the financial portfolios I provided, and they rolled out the red carpet. They practically begged us to sign the lease. That is how the real world works. You would not understand that sitting in your little supply chain cubicle all day. I almost smiled. The leasing agent made an exception. That was the lie he had constructed to justify his felony. He truly believed his own arrogance could override federal law. He thought he was untouchable. Why are you interrogating your father when you should be on the phone with the bank? Linda demanded, her voice rising in pitch. We are standing here trying to facilitate a major life transition for your sister, and you are playing stupid interrogation games. Pick up your phone, Bethany. I looked at my mother, a woman who had spent my entire childhood treating my existence as a personal inconvenience. I looked at the woman who had repeatedly told me I was too rigid, too boring, and too focused on my career to ever achieve true happiness. I looked at her and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a profound, sweeping emptiness. "My phone is broken, Linda," I replied, gesturing to the cracked, dark screen resting on the table. "It was crushed in the accident. You know, the accident that left me with a punctured lung, 3 broken ribs, and a shattered leg. The accident that the trauma surgeon called you about 12 times while I was bleeding in the emergency room." Thomas scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "Do not start playing the victim, Bethany. You are sitting up. You are talking. You are clearly fine. The doctors said you just needed some rest and a few casts. We told them we would check on you later because Brittany had a strict, non-refundable window for the service elevator at Maple Avenue. You are a grown woman. You can sit in a hospital bed by yourself for a few hours without throwing a massive temper tantrum." "Honestly, Bethany, you are being so incredibly selfish right now," Brittany complained, crossing her arms. "I have to get back to the building. The moving guys are charging by the hour, and the lobby security guard was giving us a really hard time when we left. I need my furniture upstairs before sunset so I can film the golden hour lighting. Just give Dad a different credit card so we can leave." I stared at them. I let the silence stretch out thick and heavy, allowing their words to hang in the air. I wanted to remember this exact moment. I wanted to burn this memory into my brain so I would never, ever doubt the choice I was about to make. I was about to drop a legal anvil on their heads that would completely obliterate their entire world, and I needed to be absolutely certain they deserved it. They had just given me all the confirmation I would ever need. "I am not giving you another credit card," I said, my voice ringing with absolute finality. "I am not paying your moving invoice, and you are not going back to Maple Avenue." Linda gasps in theatrical horror. "How can you be so selfish? Your sister is having the most important day of her life moving into her dream home, and you are making this about your little hospital stunt." The crisp white paper of the invoice sat starkly against the dull gray plastic of my hospital tray table. $4,500. The number seemed to burn itself into my retinas. It was an astronomical sum for a moving company, but then again, Brittany never hired standard laborers. She had undoubtedly selected a premium white glove relocation service that unpacked boxes, organized closets by color, and provided custom crating for her absurdly expensive aesthetic decor. They were probably charging $500 an hour just to carry her velvet sofa up the freight elevator. Linda did not even pause to take a breath. She marched straight to the foot of my bed, her designer heels clicking sharply against the sterile linoleum. She completely ignored the complex array of medical monitors flashing my vital signs. She did not look at the heavy plaster cast elevating my crushed right leg, or the thick gauze bandages wrapped tightly around my broken ribs. Her eyes were fixed entirely on my face, burning with a self-righteous indignation that was entirely disconnected from reality. "We told you to fix the card issue 30 minutes ago," Linda hissed, her voice carrying a sharp, venomous edge that echoed uncomfortably in the quiet, critical care unit. "The movers are threatening to leave Brittany's custom velvet sofa right on the Maple Avenue sidewalk. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was for your sister to have her card declined in front of the building concierge? It is completely unacceptable, Bethany." Thomas stepped up right beside her, his imposing frame casting a dark shadow over my bed. He reached out and aggressively tapped the crystal face of his heavy gold watch. "Call your bank and authorize the charge," he commanded, his voice dropping into the harsh, dictatorial tone he used to terrify his subordinate employees. "Now. We do not have time to deal with your banking errors today." The sheer audacity of the demand hung in the sterile air, suffocating and dense. I was lying in a trauma ward, hooked up to intravenous painkillers, with a punctured lung and shattered bones. I had been pulled from the mangled wreckage of my car by emergency responders using hydraulic rescue tools. Yet my father was standing over my broken body, tapping his watch and treating my near-death experience like a minor administrative hurdle in his daily schedule. I slowly shifted my gaze away from the crumpled invoice. I looked at my father, capturing the angry red flush creeping up his thick neck. I looked at my mother, noting the tight, furious lines around her mouth. Then I turned my head carefully, avoiding the sharp stabbing pain in my collarbone, to look at my younger sister. Brittany was standing a few feet away, completely detached from the tense confrontation unfolding at the foot of my bed. She was busy checking her makeup in her phone's front-facing camera. She tilted her head to the side, inspecting her cheekbones, pouting her lips to ensure her expensive lip gloss had not smudged during the stressful drive to the hospital. She was standing in an intensive care unit where people were actively fighting for their lives, and her only concern was whether the harsh fluorescent lighting was washing out her perfect complexion. Seeing her stand there completely absorbed in her own vanity triggered a vivid, visceral memory from 15 years ago. I was 16 years old and had been running a high fever for 2 days. I was shivering violently on the living room sofa, coughing until my ribs ached, begging my parents to take me to an urgent care clinic. My mother had simply handed me a bottle of generic aspirin and told me to stop being so dramatic. She and my father were entirely focused on helping Brittany prepare for a high school winter formal. They spent 3 hours taking photographs, steaming a silk dress, and arranging transportation, while I lay sweating and delirious in the next room. When I eventually developed severe pneumonia and had to be hospitalized, my parents blamed me for ruining Brittany's magical weekend with my inconvenient illness. The pattern had never changed. It had only escalated in scale and cost. My pain was always an annoyance, my achievements were always a threat, and my financial resources were always treated as an open communal trough for them to plunder whenever Brittany required a lifestyle upgrade. They had spent my entire life casting me in the role of the reliable, silent workhorse, whose only purpose was to fund and facilitate the golden child's glorious existence. I looked back down at the moving company invoice resting on my tray table. The physical agony in my chest throbbed with a vicious, relentless rhythm, but my mind had never been sharper or more terrifyingly clear. The heavy narcotics pumping through my veins could not dull the cold, absolute certainty settling into my bones. The trap David and I had set was flawless, and my family had marched right into the center of it, completely blinded by their own toxic greed. I lifted my uninjured left arm. My muscles were weak and my joints were stiff from the trauma, but my movement was entirely smooth and deliberate. I reached out and placed my fingertips lightly against the edge of the crisp white paper. I did not crumple it. I did not tear it up in a fit of emotional rage. I simply maintained eye contact with my father and calmly pushed the invoice off the edge of the plastic tray. The paper fluttered silently through the air. It drifted back and forth before landing face down on the cold, polished linoleum floor. The soft sliding sound it made was the only noise in the room for a long, breathless second. "I am not authorizing anything," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial absolute zero. "The card is frozen." The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Thomas stared at the blank back of the invoice on the floor, as if I had just committed a profound act of violence against him. He blinked rapidly, his mind clearly short-circuiting. In his universe, his oldest daughter did not issue refusals. She did not set boundaries. She simply absorbed the abuse and quietly paid the bills. The concept of me actively denying him access to my funds was completely alien to his reality. Linda, however, reacted instantly. Her eyes went wide and she clapped a manicured hand over her mouth. She gasped, drawing in a sharp, jagged breath of theatrical horror. The performance was flawless, practiced over decades of manipulating every family dynamic to frame herself as the long-suffering matriarch dealing with a difficult child. "How can you be so selfish?" Linda cried out, her voice vibrating with manufactured outrage. She stepped closer, gripping the metal railing of my hospital bed so tightly her knuckles turned a stark bone white. "Your sister is having the most important day of her life. She is finally moving into her dream home. She has been planning this aesthetic for months, Bethany. Months." I watched my mother's face contort into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. The maternal concern she should have felt for her severely injured daughter was entirely absent, replaced by a vicious protective instinct for Brittany's material comfort. Linda genuinely believed that my refusal to pay a fraudulent invoice was a malicious, calculated attack on the family order. And you are making this about your little hospital stunt? Linda continued, her voice rising to a shrill, piercing pitch that cut through the steady hum of the medical equipment. You always do this. You always find a way to ruin Brittany's happiness because you are so bitterly jealous of her. You are lying in a bed doing absolutely nothing. You do not even need your money right now. You are deliberately sabotaging her moving day just to get attention. My little hospital stunt. I let the words echo in my mind. I looked at the thick plastic tubes draining fluid from my chest. I looked at the heavy titanium pins drilled directly into my shattered leg bones. I listened to the rapid, frantic beeping of the cardiac monitor tracking my spiking heart rate. A team of highly trained trauma surgeons had spent 6 hours piecing my broken body back together. I had flatlined twice on the operating table, and my mother was calling it a little hospital stunt designed to steal attention away from Brittany's new velvet sofa. There was a time when a comment like that would have completely shattered me. There was a time when I would have internalized that cruel dismissal, when I would have questioned my own reality and frantically tried to appease her just to restore peace. I would have reached for my phone, unblocked the bank account, and paid the invoice while apologizing for being an inconvenience. But that version of Bethany was dead. She had died in the crushed metal of my car, and she had died again the moment David showed me the fraudulent lease agreement bearing my stolen Social Security number. I did not yell. I did not defend the severity of my injuries. I did not point out the absolute sociopathy of her statement. I simply lay back against the stiff pillows and let the profound, heavy silence stretch out between us. I watched the three of them standing there, bathed in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the intensive care unit. They were completely oblivious to the massive, catastrophic legal avalanche hanging directly over their heads. They thought this was just another standard family argument. They thought they could bully, guilt, and shame me into submission just like they had done 1,000 times before. They had absolutely no idea that David was currently standing in the lobby of Maple Avenue with a team of armed Chicago police officers. They had no idea that the luxury penthouse Brittany was so desperate to furnish was currently being locked down and designated as an active crime scene. They had no idea that Thomas's entire corporate career was about to evaporate into thin air. I looked at my mother's furious, expectant face waiting for me to cave. I took a slow, shallow breath, preparing to let her words hang right up until my father's phone rang with the news of his arrest. Brittany finally lowered her phone entirely. The screen went dark as she crossed her arms over her pristine, matching designer athletic jacket. She marched toward the side of my hospital bed, her expression twisting into a vicious sneer that completely ruined her carefully curated, innocent online persona. "You are just jealous." Brittany spat, her voice echoing sharply off the complex medical equipment surrounding me. "You are just horribly, bitterly jealous because you are stuck in a boring corporate job while I am actually upgrading my lifestyle. You have zero aesthetic, Bethany. You have zero vision for your future. You just sit behind a desk and crunch numbers all day while I am out here building a personal brand." She gestured vaguely at my broken body, encased in heavy plaster and thick white bandages, as if my massive physical trauma was a deliberate personal insult directed solely at her. "You are literally lying in a bed doing nothing right now," she continued, her tone dripping with absolute disdain. "You do not even need your money. You are going to be stuck in this intensive care unit for weeks. What are you going to spend it on? Intravenous fluids. Just pay the movers. If those guys leave my custom velvet sofa on the sidewalk, it is going to get ruined and you are completely ruining my moving day aesthetic." I listened to her words. I let them wash over me, analyzing the pure, unadulterated narcissism vibrating in every single syllable. She honestly believed that her interior design choices were vastly more important than my physical survival. She looked at a woman who had nearly died hours ago and only saw an uncooperative automated teller machine. I did not yell. I did not raise my voice. I did not even flinch. The frantic beeping of the heart monitor next to my bed actually began to slow down, steadying into a calm, rhythmic pulse. The heavy dose of medical painkillers in my system was completely overpowered by the sudden surging rush of cold crystal-clear adrenaline. I turned my head away from Brittany. I completely ignored her petulant, demanding stare. She was just the symptom. My father was the disease. I locked my eyes directly onto Thomas. He was still gripping the edge of my tray table, his knuckles white, his jaw set in a hard, furious line. He was waiting for me to break. He was waiting for the inevitable moment where I would surrender to their combined emotional assault, just like I had surrendered 1,000 times before. "Your lifestyle," I said, my voice slicing through the sterile air like a surgical scalpel. I kept my gaze fixed entirely on my father, coldly dissecting the entitlement. "You mean the lifestyle funded by stealing my identity, Dad?" The room went dead silent. The heavy, suffocating quiet was absolute, broken only by the mechanical hiss of my oxygen line and the slow, steady beep of my cardiac monitor. Linda stopped gasping. Brittany's arms dropped slowly to her sides, her mouth falling open in mute shock. Thomas's face paled rapidly. The angry red blotches on his thick neck and cheeks vanished instantly, replaced by a sickly grayish-white hue. His broad shoulders suddenly dropped a fraction of an inch. He opened his mouth to speak, but his jaw just worked silently for a moment. He had not expected this. He had prepared for a screaming fight over credit card limits and moving expenses. He had not prepared for the chief executive officer of Apex Holdings to uncover his massive financial felony within 24 hours of a near-fatal car crash. I did not wait for him to formulate an excuse. I did not give him the space to construct a lie or build a defensive wall. "Did you really think I would not find out?" I asked, my tone conversational, but laced with absolute lethal precision. "Did you really think falsifying my W-2s to guarantee a luxury lease would not trigger a massive internal fraud alert on my credit file?" Thomas took a small, involuntary step back. His heavy leather shoes squeaked slightly against the polished linoleum floor. "I know exactly what you did." I continued, pinning him down with my unblinking stare. "You knew Brittany could never pass the background check for the Maple Avenue penthouse. You knew her liquid income was entirely non-existent. So you bypassed the standard guarantor application completely. You took the social security number you had on file from when you claimed me as a dependent in college. You forged my physical signature on the primary lease agreement. You submitted my corporate banking details, and you falsified official federal tax documents to prove my executive income was actively flowing into her personal accounts." I paused, taking a shallow, careful breath against the tight bandages wrapping my fractured ribs. A sharp spike of pain radiated through my chest, but I refused to let it show on my face. "You legally bound me to a $10,000 a month lease," I stated, laying out the facts with clinical detachment. "You made me the primary tenant on a luxury property without my knowledge or my consent. You committed federal identity theft and wire fraud to secure an apartment for a 30-year-old woman who refuses to get a paying job." Thomas stared at me. For a fleeting second, I saw pure, unadulterated terror flash across his eyes. He saw the cold, calculated reality of federal prison looming right in front of him. He saw his prestigious banking career, his country club memberships, and his carefully curated social standing all disintegrating into ash. But then the terror vanished. It was instantly replaced by the stubborn, entitled arrogance that had defined his entire existence. He could not be a criminal. He was the patriarch. He was the head of the family. The rules simply did not apply to him because he was Thomas, and he always knew best. He puffed his chest out, taking a large step forward to re-establish his physical dominance over my hospital bed. He quickly attempted to gaslight me, deploying his usual tactic of twisting reality until his victim felt like the guilty party. "I did not steal anything." Thomas barked, his voice loud and aggressive, bouncing harshly off the sterile tile walls. "Do not use ugly words like fraud, Bethany. You are being completely hysterical. You are family. Family shares resources. That is how the real world works." He waved his thick hand dismissively, acting as if forging federal tax documents was the equivalent of borrowing a cup of sugar from a neighbor. "I was just borrowing your credit score because yours is better," he rationalized, his tone dripping with patronizing condescension. "You have excellent credit because we raised you to be responsible. We gave you the foundation to succeed in the corporate world. You owe us for that foundation. I simply utilized the family assets to help your sister get a head start. It was a temporary measure. I was going to transition the lease into her name once her influencer career took off, and she started generating real brand revenue. Linda immediately jumped in, nodding vigorously in agreement. Her temporary shock was entirely replaced by fierce maternal defense of her husband's actions. Exactly, Bethany, she chimed in. Your father was just being a good provider. He was taking care of his children. You have more money than you could ever possibly spend. You sit in that massive penthouse all alone. Why shouldn't your sister have a nice, safe place to live? You have plenty to share. You are blowing this entirely out of proportion. Thomas continued, leaning over the metal railing of the bed, again his face inches from mine. The smell of his expensive cologne mixed sickeningly with the harsh hospital antiseptic. If you report this, if you actually call the police over a simple family misunderstanding, you will ruin my career over a minor technicality. You will destroy this family, Bethany. He pointed a thick, demanding finger directly at my face, attempting to project the ultimate absolute authority. Drop it, Bethany, he commanded, his voice low and threatening. Unfreeze the emergency credit card, pay the movers, and drop this ridiculous identity theft nonsense right now. I am your father, and I am telling you to drop it. The sheer magnitude of his delusion was staggering. He had stolen my identity, forged my signature, and committed massive financial fraud, yet he was standing in a hospital intensive care unit telling me that I was the one threatening the family. He genuinely believed that his authority as my father completely overrode the laws of the United States government. He thought he could just order me to ignore a felony because it was inconvenient for his golden child's moving day aesthetic. I looked at the finger pointing in my face. I looked at the red, angry flush returning to his cheeks. I looked at Linda nodding along with his insane justifications, and Brittany tapping her foot impatiently, waiting for her money. They were a united front of entitlement and abuse. They had fed off my compliance for 33 years. They had built their entire comfortable existence on the assumption that I would never, ever fight back. I took another slow, steady breath, letting the oxygen flow into my remaining good lung. The physical pain in my shattered leg was completely eclipsed by the profound, beautiful clarity settling over my mind. I was not just going to drop it. I was going to drop them. The crisp white paper of the moving company delivery invoice sat starkly against the dull gray plastic of my hospital tray table. $4,500. The bold black numbers seemed to burn themselves directly into my retinas. It was an absolutely astronomical sum for a local residential move. But then again, Brittany never hired standard laborers. My younger sister had undoubtedly selected a premium white glove relocation service. She would have demanded a company that carefully unpacked every single box, organized her walk-in closets by specific color palettes, and provided custom wooden crating for her absurdly expensive aesthetic decor. They were probably charging her $500 an hour just to carry her heavy custom velvet sofa up the building freight elevator. I lay there in my stiff hospital bed, a heavy plaster cast elevating my crushed right leg, and thick gauze bandages wrapped tightly around my 3 broken ribs. A team of highly trained trauma surgeons had just spent hours picking shattered glass out of my flesh and reinflating my punctured lung. Yet the only thing my family saw when they looked at my battered body was an uncooperative automated teller machine. I had spent the last 33 years acting as the reliable scapegoat, absorbing their endless criticisms while secretly funding their lavish lifestyles. The absolute sheer impossibility of their coldness settled heavily over my chest, weighing far more than my broken bones and the plaster cast combined. I listened to the rapid, frantic beeping of the cardiac monitor tracking my spiking heart rate. The heavy liquid narcotics pumping steadily through my intravenous line could not dull the sharp, stabbing realization that my family was completely devoid of basic human empathy. Linda did not even pause to take a breath or ask a single question about my medical status. She marched straight to the foot of my bed, her designer heels clicking sharply against the sterile linoleum floor. She completely ignored the complex array of medical monitors flashing my vital signs, in bright neon green and red numbers. She did not look at the terrifying metal braces holding my leg together, or the thick plastic tubes draining dark fluid from my side. Her eyes were fixed entirely on my face, burning with a self-righteous indignation that was entirely disconnected from the reality of the trauma ward. She clutched her massive luxury handbag tightly against her side, holding the thick leather straps with white-knuckled tension, as if the intensive care unit was a dirty, inconvenient place she simply had to endure for a few minutes. The overwhelming scent of her expensive floral perfume clashed aggressively with the sharp, sterile smell of iodine and bleach that permeated the room. "We told you to fix the card issue 30 minutes ago." Linda snapped, her voice echoing harshly against the sterile tile walls, completely disrupting the quiet hum of the recovery floor. "The movers are threatening to leave Brittany's custom velvet sofa right on the Chicago sidewalk if we do not hand them $4,500. It is completely unacceptable, Bethany. Call the bank and authorize the charge immediately." The sheer audacity of her demand hung in the sterile air, suffocating and dense. In her twisted narcissistic reality, a custom velvet sofa resting on a public sidewalk was a catastrophic emergency that entirely eclipsed her oldest daughter, nearly bleeding to death in a horrific traffic accident. She genuinely believed that my failure to answer my cell phone while I was sedated in emergency surgery was a deliberate, malicious attempt to sabotage Brittany's special day. Thomas stepped up right beside her, his imposing frame casting a dark, heavy shadow over my bed. He reached out and aggressively tapped the crumpled invoice he had just slammed onto my tray table. Then he raised his wrist and tapped the crystal face of his heavy gold watch with an impatient, thick finger. "Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to have a card declined in front of the building manager?" he demanded, his face flushed with angry red blotches. "Call your bank and authorize the charge. Now." He dropped his voice into the harsh, dictatorial tone he used to terrify his subordinate corporate employees. "We have an invoice to settle, and we do not have time to deal with your banking errors today." He looked at me with pure, unadulterated irritation. There was not a single ounce of paternal concern in his cold eyes. He did not see a daughter who had just survived a catastrophic, near-fatal collision. He saw a defective financial tool. He saw a resource that was currently malfunctioning and causing an unacceptable delay in his afternoon schedule. The visual contrast between my horrific reality and their absolute shallow vanity was physically sickening. I had spent my entire childhood desperately trying to earn a fraction of the pride he so freely showered on my sister, but staring up at his demanding red face, I finally understood the unvarnished truth. I was never a daughter to them. I was a disposable safety net expected to catch them whenever they decided to jump. I slowly turned my head, carefully avoiding the sharp, stabbing pain in my neck, to look at my younger sister. Brittany had not even approached the bed. She was standing near the doorway, completely ignoring the sterile medical equipment and the sharp chemical smell of hospital antiseptic. She was completely detached from the tense confrontation unfolding at the foot of my mattress. She had her smartphone raised high in the air, tilting her head from side to side to capture the perfect lighting for a front-facing camera selfie. She puffed out her lips, checking her reflection with absolute total absorption. She patted her flawless, messy bun and smoothed down the front of her pristine, matching designer athletic set. She was standing in an intensive care unit where trauma patients were actively fighting for their lives, and her only concern was whether the harsh fluorescent medical lighting was washing out her expensive cheek contouring. She did not even glance in my direction. My crushed leg and punctured lung were entirely irrelevant to her aesthetic. She was the golden child, the flawless epicenter of my parents' universe, and she possessed an entitlement so profound it bordered on actual sociopathy. I looked at her and felt a deep, hollow emptiness. I had spent decades trying to protect her, trying to help her succeed in life, but she viewed my sacrifices as her fundamental birthright. I slowly looked from the moving company invoice resting on my plastic tray table to my father's demanding face. Then I looked past him to Brittany, who was now busy applying a fresh coat of lip gloss while staring intently at her phone screen. I slowly lifted my uninjured left hand. My fingers were bruised and stiff, covered in small purple contusions from the impact of the steering wheel airbag. But my movements were entirely smooth and deliberate. The physical agony in my chest throbbed with a vicious, relentless rhythm with every breath I took. But my mind had never been sharper or more terrifyingly clear. I had spent a lifetime backing down to avoid their wrath. I had sacrificed my own peace of mind to ensure their comfort. But laying in this bed completely broken, I realized I had nothing left to lose. I placed my fingertips against the edge of the paper. I did not crumple it up. I did not tear it to shreds in a fit of emotional rage. I simply maintained direct, unblinking eye contact with my father and calmly pushed the invoice off the edge of the tray. The paper fluttered silently through the air, drifting back and forth before landing face down on the cold, polished linoleum floor. The soft, sliding sound it made was the only noise in the room for a long, breathless second. "I am not authorizing anything," I said, my voice dropping to a low, terrifyingly calm register. "The card is frozen." The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. The absolute shock of my defiance rippled through the small hospital room. In their universe, I did not issue refusals. I did not set boundaries. I simply absorbed their endless demands and quietly paid the bills to keep the peace. Whenever they needed a bailout, I was expected to open my wallet and ask no questions. The concept of me actively denying them access to my funds while staring them straight in the face was completely alien to their reality. I was the scapegoat. I was the financial safety net they never had to acknowledge or thank. Thomas stared at the blank back of the invoice on the floor as if I had just committed a profound act of violence against him. He blinked rapidly, his mind clearly short-circuiting as he struggled to comprehend my blatant, unyielding disobedience. Linda, however, reacted instantly. Her eyes went wide and she clapped a manicured hand over her mouth. She gasped, drawing in a sharp, jagged breath of theatrical horror. The performance was flawless, practiced over decades of manipulating every family dynamic to frame herself as the long-suffering matriarch dealing with a difficult, ungrateful child. "How can you be so selfish?" Linda cried out, her voice vibrating with manufactured outrage. She stepped closer, gripping the metal railing of my hospital bed so tightly her knuckles turned a stark bone white. She leaned over me, her face twisted into a mask of pure, absolute indignation. "Your sister is having the most important day of her life moving into her dream home, and you are making this about your little hospital stunt." The narrative cuts abruptly from the quiet, sterile isolation of the intensive care unit to the chaotic, bustling environment of the 405 Maple Avenue luxury high-rise. The building lobby was an absolute masterpiece of modern architectural design. Towering walls of imported white Italian marble stretched 30 feet up toward a ceiling adorned with cascading modern crystal chandeliers. The highly polished floors reflected the soft ambient lighting, creating a space that practically screamed exclusive generational wealth. Brittany had beaten our parents back to the building. She was standing dead center in this opulent space, completely ignoring the angry moving crew waiting by the freight elevator. She was holding her smartphone at the perfect high angle on a sleek portable ring light stand, broadcasting live to over 5,000 devoted followers. Her pristine white athletic jacket caught the lighting perfectly. Behind her, the highly contested custom emerald green velvet sofa sat resting on a heavy brass moving dolly. She was actively narrating her triumphant moving day, framing the entire stressful afternoon as a massive personal victory. "Welcome to my self-made luxury era," Brittany cooed to her digital audience, tossing her blonde hair over her shoulder and striking a practiced pose. "It is all about manifesting the lifestyle you truly deserve. You simply have to refuse to settle for anything less than absolute perfection. This penthouse is literally everything I envisioned for my personal brand. The natural lighting upstairs is completely flawless, and I cannot wait to share the entire layout with you guys." She was entirely absorbed in the steady stream of heart emojis and adoring comments cascading up her screen. She did not notice the heavy glass and brass revolving doors of the main entrance spinning open. She did not notice the sudden severe shift in the atmosphere of the lobby. David stepped directly into the frame of her live broadcast. He was impeccably dressed in his tailored charcoal gray suit, moving with the precise, calculated momentum of a corporate executioner. He was flanked by two heavily armed Chicago sheriff's deputies and the imposing, physically intimidating figure of the building's head of security. David did not politely wait for her to finish speaking to her digital fans. He did not care about her ring lighting or her carefully curated aesthetic. He stepped right up to her, extending a thick manila folder containing the immediate vacate order. He spoke loudly and professionally, ensuring his sharp voice was captured perfectly by the microphone on her phone. Brittany Vance, David announced, cutting right through her cheerful live stream persona like a blade. I represent Apex Holdings, LLC. You are currently trespassing on private property under a completely fraudulent lease agreement. You have exactly 10 minutes to remove your personal belongings from this lobby before they are legally impounded as evidence in an active criminal investigation. Brittany froze. The bright artificial smile melted off her face, instantly replaced by a look of sheer, uncomprehending horror. She stared at David, the manila folder, and the grim expressions of the armed deputies. Her phone was still running, broadcasting every single second of her real-time humiliation to thousands of live viewers. The supportive chat on her screen suddenly exploded with confused mocking and highly critical comments flashing rapidly across the glass. "What are you talking about?" Brittany shrieked, her voice cracking loudly as her composure shattered. She backed away from the extended folder as if it were highly radioactive. "This is a massive mistake. You have the completely wrong person. My father is the financial guarantor on this lease. He is a very wealthy corporate executive. We just signed the official paperwork this week. You cannot do this to me. I am moving in today." David did not blink. He did not engage with her frantic theatrics. He simply turned to the head of security and gave a single sharp nod. The sheriff's deputies completely ignored her screaming and began directing the delivery men to pack the custom velvet sofa right back onto the moving truck. The movers, who had been waiting impatiently for their $4,500, did not hesitate for a fraction of a second. They grabbed the heavy brass dolly and began wheeling the expensive furniture back toward the loading dock doors. "No!" Brittany wailed, lunging forward to grab the edge of the velvet fabric. "Stop touching my things. My father is coming right now. He is going to sue all of you. He is going to buy this entire building and have you all fired." Right on cue, the glass revolving doors spun rapidly again. Thomas and Linda marched into the marble lobby, completely out of breath. They had rushed directly from my hospital room, running red lights and weaving through city traffic, convinced that the only obstacle standing between Brittany and her perfect life was a minor administrative credit card issue. Instead, they walked right into a fully mobilized police eviction. They saw the armed deputies physically blocking the path to the residential elevators. They saw the moving crew actively retreating with the expensive furniture. They saw their golden child sobbing hysterically in the center of the lobby while holding her phone up to broadcast the disaster. The narrative cuts back to the sterile quiet of the intensive care unit. My cracked phone began vibrating violently against the plastic hospital tray table. The harsh buzzing sound cut right through the quiet mechanical hiss of my oxygen line. The caller ID flashed my father's name in bold black letters. I lay perfectly still against the stiff medical pillows, watching the cracked screen light up the dim room. I let it ring once. I let it ring twice. The physical pain radiating from my shattered leg was completely eclipsed by the profound, beautiful clarity settling over my mind. I reached over with my uninjured hand and pressed the green accept button, tapping the speakerphone icon. The absolute silence of my hospital room was instantly shattered by the chaotic, frantic background noise pouring through the open line. The audio quality was surprisingly sharp, amplifying every single layer of the disaster unfolding miles away. I could hear the loud, authoritative voices of the police officers, the heavy rumbling of the moving truck outside, and Brittany's high-pitched, hysterical sobbing. Bethany Thomas yelled into the receiver, his voice cracking with absolute naked terror. The arrogant, dictatorial tone he had used just 20 minutes ago was completely eradicated. He sounded like a cornered, desperate animal caught in a snare. "Bethany, pick up the phone right now." "I am here, Thomas," I replied, my voice low and terrifyingly calm. The management company, he stammered, struggling to catch his breath over the noise of the lobby. The property management group for Maple Avenue. It is a massive corporation called Apex Holdings. They are actively evicting Brittany right now. The police are physically here in the lobby, Bethany. They are blocking the elevators and threatening to impound her belongings. They are saying the property owner personally pressed felony charges for the forged lease signature. They are taking all of her furniture. I listened to the sheer panic radiating through the phone. I did not offer a single word of comfort. "You work in the corporate sector," Bethany Thomas pleaded, his voice rising in a frantic, desperate pitch. "You deal with these kinds of massive holding companies all the time. You have high-level connections. You have to get on the phone and talk to them right now. You have to call the Apex Holdings representatives and tell them this was just a simple family misunderstanding. Tell them we will pay whatever penalty fee they want. Just get the police to back off before they ruin my career." I stared up at the acoustic ceiling tiles of the intensive care unit. I thought about the 33 years of emotional neglect. I thought about the constant belittling, the blatant favoritism, and the endless demands for my absolute compliance. I thought about my father standing over my broken, bleeding body just moments ago, waving a delivery invoice and fiercely demanding that I fund my sister's fraudulent lifestyle. My voice was glacial. It contained absolutely zero emotion. It was the voice of an executioner swinging the axe. "I do not need to talk to them, Dad." I stated the words, dropping like heavy stones into the receiver. "I am them." The chaotic background noise on the other end of the line seemed to freeze. Thomas stopped breathing. The silence from his end was so profound I could almost hear the blood rushing straight out of his face. What he whispered, the single word barely audible over the sound of a police radio crackling in the background. I continued twisting the legal knife with absolute surgical precision. "I own Apex Holdings," I said, laying out the devastating, undeniable reality. "I am the chief executive officer. I own the 405 Maple Avenue property. It is a premier asset in my personal corporate real estate portfolio." I took a slow breath, letting the truth completely obliterate his entire universe. "You did not just steal my identity to scam some random corporate landlord, Thomas," I explained coldly, dissecting his felony. "You forged my physical signature to steal a luxury apartment directly from my own company. You marched into my building, handed my leasing agents a fraudulent financial portfolio, and attempted to use my stolen credit to live rent-free in my property. The police are not leaving." There was a sharp clattering sound as Thomas literally dropped his cell phone onto the hard marble floor of the lobby. The impact did not disconnect the call. Through the open line, the audio remained crystal clear. I heard the heavy, measured footsteps of someone approaching the dropped phone. The sound of David's expensive leather shoes on the marble was unmistakable. He had executed the legal snare flawlessly, coordinating with law enforcement the exact second he received my authorization. Then I heard his crisp, professional voice cutting cleanly through the ambient noise of the lobby. "Thomas Vance." David announced, his tone ringing with undeniable legal authority. "Please place your hands behind your back. You are under arrest for felony identity theft and federal wire fraud." I heard the sharp metallic click of handcuffs ratcheting shut. I heard Linda begin to scream, a raw, guttural sound of genuine shock and disbelief. I heard Brittany wailing that her live stream was still running and that her life was completely ruined. I reached out with my left hand and tapped the red button on the cracked screen. The call disconnected instantly. The chaotic, noisy implosion of my family was suddenly cut off, leaving my hospital room in total, absolute silence. I smoothed down the wrinkled front of my faded hospital gown, making sure the intravenous lines taped to the back of my hand were secure. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the pillows, and listened to the steady, reliable, rhythmic beeping of my heart monitor. I had never felt so peaceful. The profound peace of the intensive care unit lasted for exactly 3 hours. During that time, the hospital staff rotated through my room, adjusting my intravenous fluids and checking the heavy plaster cast on my right leg. I ate a small cup of tasteless hospital gelatin and watched the pale afternoon light fade into a deep bruised purple through the single small window. I was completely disconnected from the outside world, existing in a quiet, sterile bubble of healing. But out in that world, the shockwave of Thomas Vance being hauled out of a luxury high-rise in federal handcuffs was currently ripping through our carefully curated social circle. By 6 o'clock that evening, the digital fallout reached my hospital bed. It started as a single vibration against the gray plastic tray table. Then came another. Within 10 minutes, my cracked smartphone was sliding across the plastic surface, propelled by an absolute avalanche of furious notifications. Brittany's catastrophic livestream had not just been a minor embarrassment. It had gone viral. Thousands of people had watched her screaming, while a corporate lawyer and armed deputies dismantled her fake reality. But my family had spent decades perfecting the art of spinning the narrative. Linda had clearly mobilized the moment Thomas was placed in the back of the police cruiser. She had weaponized her tears and her manufactured maternal outrage, activating the entire extended Vance family network. She had undoubtedly painted a tragic portrait of a bitter, jealous older sister orchestrating a cruel legal ambush to ruin a beautiful family milestone. I reached out with my uninjured hand and picked up the phone. The screen was a chaotic waterfall of text messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins who had swallowed Linda's hysterical, twisted version of events without a single second of critical thought. My Aunt Patricia, the self-appointed moral compass of the family, sent a massive block of text. "How could you put your own father in jail, Bethany? He has provided for you your entire life. This is sick." My cousin David, who still owed Thomas $10,000 for a failed business venture, chimed in seconds later. "You made your sister homeless out of pure jealousy. You know she struggles with her anxiety, and you pulled this stunt on her moving day. You are deeply unhinged," Uncle Gregory added his harsh judgment. "We all know you resent Brittany, but calling the police on your own flesh and blood is disgusting. You are a monster for doing this from a hospital bed. You need serious psychiatric help." The messages kept pouring in. They accused me of malice, of insanity, of a calculated desire to destroy my loving parents. For 33 years, a barrage like this would have instantly crushed me. The old Bethany would have been hyperventilating frantically, typing out tearful apologies, trying to explain herself, trying to beg for their understanding. I would have internalized their collective disappointment and assumed that I was somehow the villain of the story. But the woman reading those messages was not the old Bethany. My chest throbbed with the dull, heavy ache of fractured ribs, and my leg felt like it was encased in solid lead, but my spirit was entirely untouchable. I felt absolutely no urge to engage in an emotional digital brawl with people who were committed to misunderstanding me. I was not going to defend my right to exist and protect my own assets. I was simply going to drop the nuclear option. I slowly shifted my weight against the stiff hospital pillows, preparing my ammunition. I did not type out a single reply. I opened the hospital's patient portal on my phone and accessed the official emergency contact logs from the night of my accident. The digital record was stark and undeniable. It clearly displayed the 12 separate outgoing calls the trauma center staff had placed to Thomas and Linda Vance while I was actively crashing in the surgical ward. Next to each timestamp was the clinical, devastating notation. "Call ignored, went to voicemail." I took a crisp, high-resolution screenshot. Next, I opened my camera application. This was the hardest part. I had to look at my own broken reflection. I raised the phone slightly, ignoring the sharp spike of pain that shot through my collarbone. I framed the shot to capture the harsh, undeniable reality of my situation. I made sure the thick plastic breathing tube resting near my face was visible. I included the heavy gauze bandages wrapped tightly around my chest and the scary metallic pins protruding from the plaster cast on my leg. The harsh fluorescent lighting illuminated the deep purple and yellow bruising blooming across my cheekbones. I looked like a casualty of war because I was one. I took the photo. It was brutal and entirely devoid of any aesthetic filtering. Finally, I opened my secure corporate email client. David had been highly efficient. He had already forwarded the complete digital dossier for my review. I downloaded the scanned copy of the fraudulent Maple Avenue guarantor agreement. I carefully used a digital highlighting tool to redact the sensitive financial account numbers, but I left Thomas's blatantly forged signature perfectly visible at the bottom of the page. I then saved the attachment David had just received from his contacts at the precinct. It was a digital copy of the booking record confirming Thomas Vance was currently being processed for federal wire fraud and felony identity theft. I opened my primary social media application. I attached the screenshot of the ignored hospital calls. I attached the stark, unflinching photograph of my battered body hooked up to the intensive care monitors. And finally, I attached the redacted forged lease agreement placed right next to my father's official arrest record. I stared at the blank caption box for a long, quiet moment. I did not want to write a novel. I did not want to sound defensive or emotional. I just wanted the absolute, unvarnished truth to speak for itself. I typed out a single, devastating paragraph. While I was fighting for my life in the ICU, my father stole my identity to secure a luxury penthouse for my sister, then demanded I pay the movers while I lay bleeding. Play stupid games, win federal charges. I did not tag anyone. I did not add any dramatic crying emojis. I simply pressed the bright blue post button and let the digital hammer fall. The upload progress bar filled rapidly and the post went live across my network. I placed the phone flat on the tray table and watched the screen. I knew the algorithm would instantly serve the update to the exact same family members who had just spent the last hour aggressively attacking my character. For 3 entire minutes, the phone remained completely silent. It was the digital equivalent of a shockwave pulling all the oxygen out of a room before the blast. The extended Vance family was collectively staring at their screens, forced to reconcile Linda's hysterical narrative of a jealous sister with the brutal clinical photographic evidence of my near-death experience and my father's financial felony. Then the tide abruptly and violently shifted. The first notification was a deletion. Aunt Patricia had removed her lengthy paragraph accusing me of putting my father in jail. Seconds later, Cousin David deleted his message about me making Brittany homeless. The digital backpedaling was so frantic, I could almost picture them sweating as they scrambled to erase their complicity. The comment section on my post immediately exploded. The same relatives who had just called me a monster were now frantically typing out highly public apologies. "Oh my God, Bethany!" Aunt Patricia wrote her comment appearing right beneath the photo of my bruised face. "Linda told us you just had a minor fender bender. She said you were just holding up the moving truck out of spite. I am so incredibly sorry. Are you okay? We had absolutely no idea." Uncle Gregory chimed in, his previous aggression entirely replaced by shocked horror. "Thomas told me he was just co-signing a standard lease to help Brittany out. He forged your corporate documents. I cannot believe this. Please forgive my earlier message, Bethany. This is completely unforgivable on their part." The public humiliation of the Vance family was absolute and irreversible. Brittany's viral live stream had already exposed the eviction, but my post provided the devastating criminal context. The polished, wealthy, untouchable facade my parents had spent their entire lives building was utterly shattered in front of their friends, their colleagues, and their country club peers. They were no longer the generous, successful patriarch and the long-suffering, devoted mother. They were exposed as manipulative criminals who had abandoned their severely injured daughter to fund a fake lifestyle. I watched the frantic apologies pour in, watching my relatives desperately trying to distance themselves from the blast radius of Thomas's federal charges. I did not reply to a single comment. I did not accept their panicked backpedaling. They had shown me exactly who they were when they thought I was just being difficult. Their apologies were not born out of genuine concern for my well-being. They were born out of the terrifying realization that they had publicly backed a criminal and attacked a victim lying in a trauma ward. I reached out and completely powered down the phone. The screen went black, cutting off the desperate stream of notifications. I settled back into the hospital bed, pulling the thin thermal blanket up to my chest. The heavy weight of the Vance family expectations, the constant need to perform, the endless financial bailouts, and the suffocating emotional manipulation had finally been severed. I was completely alone in the quiet, sterile room, but for the first time in my entire 33 years of life, I was finally entirely free. The sharp, sudden buzz of the penthouse intercom system pierced the quiet kitchen, shattering the calm atmosphere David and I had just established. I frowned, setting my espresso cup down on the cool marble island. I was not expecting any deliveries, and the building security at my residence was famously strict about unannounced visitors. I limped over to the wall-mounted security panel, the heavy tread of my orthopedic boot thumping against the hardwood floor. I pressed the blinking silver button. "Yes," I said, speaking clearly into the microphone. "Ms. Vance." The crisp voice of the head concierge echoed through the small speaker. "I apologize for the interruption, but there is a woman down here in the main lobby demanding to see you. She bypassed the outer security desk and is causing quite a scene near the residential elevators." "Who is it?" I asked, my voice hardening instantly, as a familiar cold knot of anticipation formed in my stomach. "She says she is your mother," the concierge replied, his tone laced with heavy professional discomfort. "She is crying quite hysterically, Ms. Vance. She is begging for just 5 minutes of your time. She says it is a matter of absolute life and death." I let my hand drop from the intercom panel. I looked across the kitchen at David. He had already paused in the middle of closing his briefcase, his posture instantly shifting back into the defensive, aggressive stance of a corporate litigator protecting a client. He raised one eyebrow, silently asking if I wanted him to call the police and have her removed for trespassing. I shook my head slowly. The old Bethany would have panicked. The old Bethany would have immediately buzzed her up, terrified of causing a public scene, terrified of the emotional manipulation that was about to walk through the door. But the woman standing in the penthouse was different. The Vance family had been stripped of their power, their wealth, and their social standing. Linda was no longer the imposing, untouchable matriarch dictating orders from a pedestal of absolute authority. She was a desperate, broke woman standing in my lobby begging for an audience. "Send her up," I told the concierge, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "But tell security to wait right outside my door. If she raises her voice, I want her escorted out of the building immediately." "Understood, Ms. Vance?" The concierge replied, relief evident in his voice. David crossed his arms over his chest, leaning back against the marble island. "Are you sure you want to do this? Bethany, you owe her absolutely nothing. The legal severance is complete. You do not have to subject yourself to whatever theatrical performance she has prepared." "I know I don't," I replied, turning to face the polished chrome doors of my private elevator. "But I want to look her in the eye now that she has nothing left to leverage. I want to see what happens when the golden child's mother finally realizes she backed the wrong horse." The soft, mechanical hum of the elevator echoed through the foyer, signaling its rapid ascent to the penthouse floor. I did not move toward the door. I stood my ground in the center of the spacious living room, forcing her to come to me. With a soft chime, the doors slid open. Linda stumbled out of the elevator. The transformation was shocking. 2 months ago, she had marched into my intensive care unit looking like a polished, untouchable socialite, smelling of expensive perfume and dripping in designer labels. The woman standing in my foyer looked like a complete stranger. Her expensive highlights had grown out, revealing stark gray roots. Her face was haggard, deeply lined with stress and exhaustion. She was wearing a plain, slightly wrinkled blouse and slacks that looked like they had been purchased off a discount rack. The massive luxury handbag she usually carried like a shield was gone, replaced by a simple, worn leather purse. She took 2 steps into the penthouse and stopped, staring at me with wide, frantic eyes. She looked at my walking boot, at the rigid posture I held, and then her gaze flicked to David, who was watching her with the cold, dead eyes of a shark. "Bethany," Linda gasped, her voice cracking immediately as she pressed her hands against her chest. "Thank God. Thank God you let me up. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't have anywhere else to go." She took another step forward, tears instantly spilling over her eyelashes and tracking through the thin layer of foundation on her cheeks. It was the exact same theatrical weeping she had deployed in the hospital room, but this time it lacked the arrogant foundation of entitlement. It was just desperate and pathetic. "Stop right there," I commanded, my voice slicing through her performance like a blade. "You asked for 5 minutes, Linda. You have 4 left. Speak." She flinched as if I had physically struck her. The use of her first name stripping away the maternal title she had weaponized for decades clearly rattled her. She opened her mouth, closing it twice before she could force the words out. "We lost everything, Bethany," she wailed, her shoulders shaking violently. "They took the house. They took the retirement accounts. Thomas is working night shifts managing a warehouse inventory just to pay the mortgage on the terrible little house we had to rent in the suburbs. He is miserable. He is completely broken." I stared at her, my expression utterly blank. "And this concerns me because," Linda gasped, clearly shocked by my absolute lack of empathy. "Because he is your father? Because we are your family." "I know he made a mistake, Bethany. I know what he did was wrong. But the punishment is destroying us. Brittany is having daily panic attacks living in that awful basement. She can't find a job. Everyone she knew blocked her number after that awful live stream. We are drowning." She took another step forward, reaching out a trembling hand toward me. "You proved your point, Bethany. You won. You showed everyone how powerful you are. But please, you have to help us now. You have all this money. You have this massive company. Just give Thomas a consulting job. Just a small salary so we can get back on our feet. Or let Brittany move into one of your smaller properties. Just until she figures things out. Please, you can't just leave us like this." I let her words hang in the air, echoing through the vast, quiet space of the penthouse. She wasn't here to apologize for abandoning me in a trauma ward. She wasn't here to express remorse for 33 years of emotional neglect. She was here because the ATM she had relied on was closed, and she was trying to find a new way to force her PIN code. She was still trying to sacrifice my resources to save Thomas and Brittany. I looked at the woman who had stood over my shattered body and accused me of ruining a moving day aesthetic. "You are asking me to hire a convicted felon who committed wire fraud against my own company," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial absolute zero. "And you are asking me to provide free housing for a 30-year-old woman who called my near-death experience a little hospital stunt." Linda swallowed hard, her eyes darting frantically around the room, looking for any sign of weakness. We were stressed. We weren't thinking clearly. "You have to forgive us, Bethany. We are blood. Blood doesn't forge federal tax documents," I replied, my tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "Blood doesn't ignore 12 emergency calls from a trauma surgeon. Blood doesn't leave their daughter bleeding in a hospital bed because a velvet sofa is sitting on a sidewalk." I took a slow, deliberate step forward, forcing Linda to physically shrink back. "You didn't come here because you love me, Linda. You came here because your golden child is finally facing the consequences of her own uselessness, and your husband's arrogance finally caught a federal charge he couldn't bully his way out of. You built your entire life on the assumption that I would always absorb the impact of your terrible choices." I pointed toward the chrome elevator doors. "That version of Bethany died in the car crash," I stated, my eyes locking onto hers with unwavering intensity. "I am not your safety net. I am not your daughter. I am the CEO of the company your husband tried to defraud, and you are currently trespassing." Linda let out a ragged, ugly sob. She opened her mouth to argue, to deploy another wave of desperate manipulation, but David stepped forward, his cell phone already in his hand. "Your 5 minutes are up, Linda," David said, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "Security is waiting in the hall. You can walk into the elevator on your own, or they can physically escort you out of the building. Your choice." Linda looked from David to me. She searched my face for any flicker of the obedient, desperate-to-please girl she had raised. She found absolutely nothing but cold, impenetrable stone. The realization finally hit her. The well was completely dry. The Vance family ATM was permanently destroyed. Her shoulders slumped in total defeat. The theatrical weeping stopped, instantly replaced by a hollow, vacant stare. Without another word, she turned around and dragged her feet back toward the elevator. I watched the chrome doors slide shut, sealing her away from my life forever. The soft hum of the elevator descending echoed in the quiet foyer. I turned back to the kitchen, walking over to the marble island. I picked up my espresso cup, taking a long, satisfying sip. So David said, breaking the silence, a faint smirk playing on his lips. What is on the agenda for the rest of the day? I looked out the massive windows at the sprawling city below, feeling the bright morning sun warming my face. I think I'm going to buy a new velvet sofa, I said, just for the aesthetic. The profound silence of my penthouse was a carefully cultivated luxury. It was a stark contrast to the chaotic, frantic energy that had defined my entire existence under the Vance family name. 2 months had passed since my discharge from the hospital trauma ward. My shattered leg was now encased in a heavy orthopedic walking boot, and my fractured ribs had healed enough to allow me to take deep, unhindered breaths. I was physically scarred, but mentally I had never been stronger or more untouchable. I was sitting at my kitchen island reviewing the latest quarterly reports for Apex Holdings when the sharp, sudden buzz of the secure intercom system shattered the morning calm. I did not flinch. I slowly set down my digital tablet and walked over to the wall-mounted security panel. The building concierge had strict orders regarding my family, but Linda had always possessed a terrifyingly relentless determination when she wanted something. She had apparently spent the last 2 hours loitering outside the building waiting for a delivery driver to prop open the secondary service entrance. The security desk had caught her on the cameras, but only after she had already slipped into the private residential elevator bay and ridden the car directly up to my floor. I tapped the glowing screen of the security monitor. The high-definition camera mounted outside my heavy, reinforced mahogany front door flickered to life. The image that appeared on the screen was a devastating portrait of absolute total ruin. Linda was standing in the wide, softly lit hallway, staring directly into the camera lens. The transformation she had undergone over the past 2 months was nothing short of catastrophic. The woman who had marched into my intensive care unit, dripping in designer labels and smelling of expensive floral perfume, was completely gone. The arrogant, untouchable matriarch of the Vance family had been entirely erased by the brutal, crushing reality of the federal justice system. Her expensive salon highlights had grown out, revealing wide bands of stark gray roots. Her face was haggard, deeply lined with stress exhaustion and the terrible weight of public humiliation. She was wearing a plain, faded blouse and shapeless slacks that looked like they had been pulled from the bottom of a donation bin. Her hands were shaking violently as she gripped the straps of a cheap, worn leather purse. She looked small, defeated, and entirely stripped of the toxic, unearned superiority she had wielded like a weapon for my entire life. "Bethany," she called out, her voice tinny and thin through the intercom speaker. "Bethany, I know you are in there. The front desk said you were home. Please open the door." I stood in my quiet, secure foyer staring at the digital monitor. I did not reach for the brass handle of the deadbolt. I did not feel the familiar suffocating rush of anxiety that usually accompanied her demands. The psychological chains she and Thomas had wrapped around my mind for 33 years were completely broken. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. I pressed the silver button to activate the two-way microphone. "You are trespassing, Linda," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the speaker in the hallway. "Security is already on their way up. You have exactly 1 minute to explain why you bypassed the service entrance before I have them physically remove you from the premises." Hearing my voice, Linda visibly flinched. She pressed her hands flat against the thick wood of my door, as if she could somehow push her way through the solid barrier. "Please, Bethany," she sobbed, her voice cracking with raw, desperate panic. "You have to let me in. We need to talk. We need to fix this. You have to stop the lawyers. You have to drop the corporate restitution order. We have absolutely nothing left." I watched her face contort with genuine misery. The legal fallout from Thomas's felony wire fraud and identity theft had been swift, absolute, and entirely merciless. He had only avoided a lengthy federal prison sentence by pleading guilty to a lesser felony charge, but the financial penalties had completely annihilated them. The court had ordered massive restitution to Apex Holdings for the fraudulent lease damages. Thomas had been forced to liquidate his entire retirement portfolio, empty their savings accounts, and sell their luxury vehicles just to keep himself out of a federal penitentiary cell. The felony conviction had automatically triggered the immediate revocation of his professional financial licenses. He was fired from his prestigious banking firm, disgraced in his industry, and rendered entirely unemployable in the corporate sector. The man who had mocked my career and treated my bank account like his personal slush fund was now working night shifts, managing inventory at a logistics warehouse, just to pay the mortgage on the tiny damp house they had been forced to rent in the outer suburbs. And Brittany, the flawless golden child, was currently living in the unfinished basement of that very same rental house. Without my stolen credit score or Thomas's fraudulent financial backing, her entire influencer lifestyle had imploded in spectacular fashion. The viral livestream of her eviction had absolutely destroyed her carefully curated online aesthetic. Her followers had abandoned her, the brand deals had vanished, and she was left drowning in massive credit card debt with zero employable skills and no one left to exploit. "We are ruined," Linda wailed, her tears streaking down the digital monitor. "Thomas is broken, Bethany. He can barely walk when he gets home from the warehouse. His back is giving out. Brittany is having severe panic attacks every single day. She cannot leave the basement. She cannot show her face in public. We lost the house. We lost our friends. Everyone abandoned us." She pressed her face closer to the camera lens, her expression twisting into a mask of pathetic, desperate manipulation. "We are your family, Bethany," she pleaded, her voice dropping into a frantic, breathless whisper. "We are your blood. You have so much. You have this massive company. You have this beautiful penthouse. You have millions of dollars. We are begging you. Just call your corporate lawyers and tell them to drop the remaining restitution fines. Let Thomas keep whatever is left of his weekly paycheck. Please, Bethany. I am your mother. You cannot do this to your own flesh and blood." I stood perfectly still in my foyer, listening to her words echo through the quiet space. I analyzed the absolute audacity of her demands. She was not standing in my hallway to apologize for 33 years of emotional abuse. She was not begging for my forgiveness because she felt genuine remorse for treating me like a disposable workhorse. She was not expressing any guilt for abandoning me in a trauma ward with shattered bones and a punctured lung. She was standing there crying and begging because her actions had finally generated personal consequences she could not escape. She was only sorry because she had lost her money, her status, and her comfortable existence. She was still trying to use the concept of family as a weapon to extract my resources. I looked at the woman on the screen and realized she held absolutely no power over me anymore. The monster hiding under the bed had been dragged out into the harsh light of day and revealed to be nothing more than a sad, greedy parasite. "Family." I answered, my voice broadcasting clearly and coldly through the hallway speaker. I let the word hang in the air, sharp and unyielding. Linda stopped crying for a fraction of a second, staring at the camera lens with desperate hope. She thought the manipulation was working. She thought the ingrained childhood conditioning was finally kicking in. Family answers the phone when the hospital calls to say their daughter is bleeding out in an intensive care unit. I stated the words, striking her like physical blows. Family does not forge federal tax documents to steal a luxury apartment. Family does not stand over a shattered hospital bed and demand payment for a custom velvet sofa. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the profound, beautiful truth of my reality settle over my mind. "You are not my family, Linda," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial absolute zero. "You are just the people who taught me exactly how to survive completely alone. You made your choices. You protected the golden child, and you funded her vanity with my stolen identity. Now you get to live the life you actually earned. Do not ever come to my building again." The impact of my words shattered the last remaining fragments of her composure. The realization that the golden goose was permanently slaughtered finally registered in her mind. Linda let out a raw, guttural scream of absolute despair. She dropped entirely to her knees, right there in the polished hallway. She slumped against the heavy mahogany door, her hands clawing at the wood, as she began sobbing dramatically, violently, hoping the sheer volume of her manufactured misery would force me to open the door out of guilt or embarrassment. "Bethany, please," she shrieked, her voice echoing loudly through the corridor. "I am begging you, do not leave us like this. We are drowning." I stood in my foyer and watched her performance on the high-definition monitor for exactly 3 seconds. I watched the woman who had terrorized my childhood and dismissed my pain reduce herself to a pathetic, weeping heap on the floor. I felt no guilt. I felt no lingering desire for her approval. I felt no urge to save her from the consequences she had meticulously built with her own 2 hands. I simply reached out, extended my index finger, and firmly pressed the mute button on the intercom panel. The frantic screaming, the loud sobbing, and the desperate pounding against my door were instantly severed. The audio feed cut out completely, plunging the penthouse back into total, absolute tranquility. I turned my back on the glowing security monitor, leaving the silent image of Linda weeping on the floor behind me. I walked away from the foyer, the steady thud of my walking boot grounding me in the present moment. I moved past the kitchen island and walked directly into my spacious, sunlit living room. The morning light poured through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the pristine hardwood floors and the elegant modern furniture. The silence in my apartment was profound, deep, and entirely peaceful. It was the beautiful, undisturbed sound of a life finally lived on my own terms. 6 months later, that profound, peaceful silence was replaced by the deafening roar of genuine, unadulterated applause. The transition from the sterile quiet of my recovery to the vibrant, dynamic energy of this moment was nothing short of miraculous. The heavy, cumbersome orthopedic walking boot that had anchored me to the floor was gone. My shattered leg had completely healed, leaving behind only a faint ache on rainy mornings, as a quiet reminder of the war I had survived. The fractured ribs that had once made every single breath an agony were entirely repaired, allowing me to stand tall and breathe deeply, drawing in the crisp, energized air of absolute victory. I stood behind a sleek, transparent acrylic podium, commanding the room with an effortless, natural authority that I had spent my entire life cultivating in the shadows. I was wearing a sharply tailored bespoke suit in a deep, striking shade of emerald green. The fabric caught the natural light pouring through the massive glass ceiling above, projecting a sense of undeniable power and unshakable confidence. I did not look like a victim. I did not look like the discarded scapegoat of the Vance family. I looked exactly like the chief executive officer of Apex Holdings, an empire I had built with my own blood, sweat, and relentless determination. We were gathered in the breathtaking central atrium of the Apex Innovation Center, the newest and most ambitious commercial development in my corporate real estate portfolio. Towering walls of reinforced glass and polished steel stretched high above us, creating a space that was entirely transparent, brilliant, and structurally invincible. It was the architectural embodiment of my new psychological reality. I had designed this space to foster growth, to shelter innovation, and to stand entirely immune to the destructive forces of the outside world. I looked out over the massive crowd that had gathered for the grand opening ceremony. City officials, prominent business leaders, and key investors filled the expansive space, their faces turned upward toward the podium with genuine respect and admiration. But my focus immediately locked onto the front row. In a traditional family structure, those prime seats would have been reserved for the people who shared my bloodline. Thomas would have been sitting there in an expensive suit he could not afford, trying to absorb the ambient glory of my success while subtly taking credit for my business acumen. Linda would have been stationed right beside him, smiling perfectly for the cameras, while silently critiquing my outfit and planning how to leverage this new property for her own social climbing. Brittany would have been slouched in her chair, completely ignoring my speech, while aggressively filming the VIP crowd for her digital audience, desperately trying to make my professional milestone entirely about her online aesthetic. Instead, those chairs were filled with the people who had actually earned the right to witness my triumph. They were my chosen family, bound to me not by the random accident of genetics, but by the undeniable proof of their loyalty during my darkest hours. Sitting directly in the center was David. He was wearing his signature charcoal gray suit, his posture as impeccably sharp as his legal mind. When our eyes met, he gave a single slow nod of profound respect. David was not just my corporate litigator. He was the architect of my legal shield, the man who had unflinchingly executed my defense while I was lying broken in a hospital bed. He had dismantled my father's fraudulent schemes with surgical precision and protected my empire without a single second of hesitation. Beside David sat my core executive team: Marcus, my chief financial officer, and Elena, my vice president of operations, were smiling brightly up at me. These were the people who had kept Apex Holdings running seamlessly while I was incapacitated. But more importantly, they were the people who had rotated shifts sitting beside my bed in the intensive care unit. When the hospital staff realized that my biological parents were actively ignoring every single emergency call, Elena had immediately driven to the trauma center. She had held my uninjured hand while the doctors set the pins in my leg. Marcus had brought me home cooked meals when I could not stomach the hospital food. They had shown up completely unprompted, offering the kind of unconditional care and protection that Linda and Thomas had never even bothered to fake. I let my gaze sweep over their faces, feeling a deep, resonant warmth expanding in my chest. This was what actual family looked like. Family was not an obligation you were born into to be used as a financial hostage. Family was a title earned through consistent, supportive action. Family showed up when the walls were crashing down. Family protected you when you could not protect yourself. The biological relatives who had failed that fundamental test were now nothing more than a closed toxic chapter in the history of my life. Over the past 6 months, the iron boundary I had established on the day of Linda's desperate lobby ambush had held with absolute total perfection. There had been no further dramatic confrontations, no tearful reconciliations, and no weakening of my resolve. They were entirely excised from my existence. The reality of their lives was a stark, brutal contrast to the brilliant sunlight filling the atrium. Thomas was still trapped in the grueling physical labor of his warehouse night shifts, stripped of his professional dignity and completely ruined in the financial sector. Every single dollar of his diminished paycheck went straight toward the crushing burden of his legal fees and the strict, unyielding restitution payments flowing directly into the Apex Holdings corporate accounts. Linda was suffocating in the cramped, damp reality of their heavily mortgaged suburban rental house, stripped of the arrogant polish and the country club status she had valued above the actual life of her oldest daughter. She was forced to exist in a world where she could no longer buy her way out of consequences or spin the narrative to make herself the victim. The truth of her complicity in Thomas's felony was public knowledge, and the high society friends she had desperately tried to impress had abandoned her the exact second the scandal broke. And Brittany, the flawless, untouchable golden child, was still banished to that unfinished concrete basement. The influencer empire she had tried to build on a foundation of stolen corporate credit had completely evaporated. The viral humiliation of her eviction had permanently destroyed her digital brand. She had been forced to trade her ring lights and her luxury unboxing videos for the grim, terrifying reality of thousands of dollars in high-interest credit card debt. Without my resources to exploit or Thomas's stolen funds to prop her up, she was finally forced to face the vast, terrifying emptiness of her own cultivated uselessness. I felt absolutely zero guilt regarding their spectacular crash. I felt no lingering desire to save them or to seek their belated approval. I had spent 3 decades setting myself on fire to keep them warm, and the very second I stopped providing the fuel, they had tried to steal the matches. Letting them burn in the ashes of their own terrible choices was not an act of malice. It was simply the natural, uninterrupted flow of consequence. I leaned closer to the microphone, resting my hands flat against the cool acrylic surface of the podium. The gentle murmur of the crowd instantly hushed, waiting for my final words. We built the Apex Innovation Center on a very simple but unshakable philosophy. I told the audience, my voice ringing clear and steady through the massive space. We believe that true strength does not come from projecting an illusion of perfection. True strength comes from building a foundation so deep, so honest, and so structurally sound that it can withstand absolutely any external pressure. We designed this space to strip away the unnecessary facades and focus entirely on what is real, tangible, and resilient. I looked directly at David, Elena, and Marcus. A building is only as strong as the materials used to construct it, and the people who secure its pillars. I continued the double meaning of my words, resonating deeply with the chosen family sitting in the front row. Today, we are not just opening a commercial property. We are opening a space dedicated to those who put in the actual work, who refuse to settle for empty promises, and who understand that the most valuable assets we possess are integrity, transparency, and unwavering loyalty. The crowd erupted into a fresh wave of thunderous applause. The sheer volume of their support echoed off the high glass ceilings, washing over me in a warm, validating wave. The event coordinator stepped up onto the stage carrying a plush velvet cushion that held a pair of massive, gleaming silver scissors. I turned away from the podium and walked toward the thick emerald green ribbon stretched tightly across the main entrance of the grand atrium. I moved with a fluid, powerful grace, my body and my spirit entirely aligned and unbroken. I picked up the heavy silver scissors, feeling the cool metal pressing against my palms. I looked at the bright green fabric pulled taut, representing the final barrier between the struggles of my past and the limitless potential of my future. As I opened the silver blades, I realized the profound, beautiful truth of my journey. The ultimate revenge against the Vance family had never been about sending my father to a federal holding cell or exposing my sister's fraudulent lifestyle to the unforgiving judgment of the internet. Those were simply the legal and social mechanics of their own self-destruction. The sweetest, most absolute justice was realizing that I did not need them. The truest revenge was excising the cancerous, deeply toxic tumor of their expectations from my life entirely. It was waking up in the morning and feeling the immense quiet peace of a life completely unburdened by their manipulation. It was the breathtaking realization of my own boundless inherent worth. I positioned the blades around the thick green fabric. I was no longer the desperate daughter begging for scraps of affection from a mother who viewed me as an inconvenience. I was no longer the disposable financial shield for a father who viewed me as a corporate asset to be plundered. I was Bethany Vance, the undisputed architect of my own destiny. I squeezed the handles together. The sharp silver blades sliced cleanly through the ribbon, severing it completely. The fabric fell away, and the atrium exploded with the brilliant, blinding flashes of press cameras and the deafening, triumphant roar of the crowd. I stood in the center of my empire, surrounded by the people who genuinely loved me, breathing in the sweet, clean air of authentic, absolute freedom. Bethany's journey teaches us a profound and often difficult truth about the nature of human relationships. Society conditions us to believe that blood ties demand unconditional loyalty, endless forgiveness, and infinite sacrifice. But as Bethany discovered in the cold isolation of her hospital room, blood does not automatically forge a family. True family is not a compulsory obligation you are simply born into. It is a sacred title earned through consistent, selfless action. When the people who are supposed to protect you view your existence merely as a resource to be exploited, walking away is not an act of malice. It is an act of radical, necessary self-preservation. For decades, Bethany allowed her worth to be dictated by parents who only valued what they could extract from her to fund their golden child. Her ultimate victory was not the legal destruction of her father or the public digital humiliation of her sister. Her true triumph was recognizing her own inherent value and having the courage to establish an iron boundary. Forgiveness and peace do not require you to grant toxic people continued access to your life. You can let go of the anger while keeping the door permanently locked. Sometimes, the most devastating betrayals act as the exact catalyst we need to finally sever the heavy chains of guilt and expectation. By excising the emotional parasites from her world, Bethany made room for a chosen family, people who showed up during her absolute darkest hours without demanding a return on their emotional investment. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with toxic relatives to protect your own peace? How did you find the courage to walk away and build your own chosen family? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story of claiming your own power resonated with you, Please hit that like button and subscribe for more journeys of resilience, boundaries, and ultimate triumph.